He was giving you a ballpark estimate. You can't bet his life on that. Of course there would be delays. There always are. She shook her head. I can't believe you would endanger them like this. Did you even tell them what your father was planning? Do they know drones might be coming? He hadn't told them, of course. He had worried they might abort. I wasn't going to burden them with that knowledge. They were already worried enough about the Formic's defenses. Ben-Yahweh waved a dismissive hand. Spare me, Lem. Don't pretend you kept this from us for any reason other than your own self-interest. This is you and your father playing war games, desperately trying to outdo the other with no regard for the people caught in the middle. You're forgetting this whole escapade wasn't my idea, Ben-Yahweh. It was Victor's and Amala's. I brought it to you. I asked for your opinion. I got you involved. Yes, and you left out that crucial bit of information about a fleet of drones potentially firing on the mothership and ripping Victor and Amala apart. Lem put up his hands, stopping her, his voice even. Are you done vilifying me? I just told you the drones don't launch for 3 days. That gives us plenty of time to remove Victor and Amala from harm. Why didn't you tell me this earlier, Lem? At the very least, you should have told me about the drones the instant it became apparent that Victor and Amala would arrive behind schedule. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you would abort the mission and pull them back immediately before they reached the Formic ship. You're right. I would have. Then I made the right decision to keep it from you, said Lem. We had to know if this tactical approach would work. No one has reached the Formic ship until now. Every military that has approached it has been obliterated. Even nukes can't get within 1,000 clicks of the thing, and if we can't touch it, we can't stop it. This entire war hinges on that single objective, getting in that ship and cracking it wide open. That's why I kept the drone attack from you. Victor and Amala had to reach the ship, and if they die today, if all we learn from them is that there's a way to reach that ship, then that's knowledge worth dying for. Victor and Amala would agree with me. She shook her head and was quiet a long moment, not looking at him. Finally she said, So now what? We pull them out? Tell them to turn back? No, we tell them nothing. They're at the ship. That's the first big hurdle. They actually might sabotage it. And if they do, my father will have no need to launch the drones. In the meantime, you will help me convince him to postpone his attack. How? We'll go to my father and tell him about Victor and Amala, show him they've reached the ship, and ask that he postpone. He won't listen, said Ben-Yahweh. You know him as well as I do. He'll see Victor and Amala as unfortunate casualties, and he'll launch anyway. Which is why you and I are going to prove to him that attacking the mothership with lasers is a dangerous idea. That won't take 3 days, said Ben-Yahweh. That's an easy argument to make. I'll talk to him myself. Lem shook his head. It's not that simple. The glazer my father is using with the drones is not like the prototype you and Dublin developed. It's smaller, more compact. A different team of engineers has been developing it for over a year now, based on your and Dublin's original designs. They started as soon as we sent word from the Kuiper Belt that the glazer was operational. She looked affronted. Why aren't Dublin and I consulting with these people? We spent 6 years designing the prototype. We know the tech better than anyone. We could point out flaws, suggest refinements, help them avoid the same mistakes we made. Because when you say flaws or refinements, all my father hears is delays, delays, delays. You're not consulting because you'd muck up his production schedule. You'd slow everything down. Yes, but going to market too soon, hurrying a glazer into production before it's ready, that's far more dangerous. This doesn't make sense, Lem. This isn't like your father. He's never reckless. My father is eager to end a war, Ben-Yahweh. The glazers are his answer, whether they're ready or not. They can't possibly be ready. A year isn't enough time. How could they have made the necessary modifications that fast without encountering glitches? That's what you and I must prove. Fine. Take me to them. Dublin can come as well. We'll inspect them. If there's anything amiss, we'll detect it. Lem shook his head. Close, but no. I'm going to inspect the glazer, and you're going to stay here, watch a live feed from my camera, and tell me what I'm looking at. The glazers are being assembled in a manufacturing plant that isn't on the company map. High-level clearance. You don't have access. They'd frog-march you out of there before you got within 100 meters of the place. You don't have clearance either. I'm the son of the CEO. Everyone knows my face. They'll assume I have clearance. And even if they are suspicious, even if they want to approach me and question my presence, they'll be too afraid of offending Father to say a word. I'll be fine. How will you get in the doors? Lem pulled a small proximity chip from his pocket. With this, he slipped it into his wrist pad. It will open every door in the company. I'm not going to ask where you got that or how much it cost. I bought it from one of Father's former security officers. Former? He suddenly came into some money and decided to retire. Lem rebooted his wrist pad so it would recognize the chip. Watch the feed and walk me through the inspection. I'm going there now. He turned and moved toward the exit. You should have told me about the drones sooner, Lem. He didn't answer. He pushed open the door, deactivated his greaves, and leaped to his skimmer. He flew out of the dome and headed east, putting the city behind him. Father built the company's tunnels outside of Imbrium in a wide, intricate web far from the prying eyes of regulators. The plant where the drones were being prepped was down in the easternmost tunnels, where security was especially tight. Lem had visited once before when he weaseled his way into a tour the plant manager was giving Father. What Lem saw had impressed him. Dozens of drones being armed with glazers, hundreds of assembly bots welding and cutting and drilling, an army of workers frantically trying to make Father's deadline. It was a clear testament to how determined Father was in his cause. Lem's guidance system spotted the landing pad and he brought the skimmer down dead center. The pad sank below the surface and into the docking bay, where the docking bots grabbed the skimmer and slid it into a holding container. A tube encircled the cockpit and allowed Lem to exit. His earpiece was synced with his wrist pad, and he listened as it gave him directions from the bay to the foot tunnels. Dozens of employees were in the tunnels going about their business. Lem walked down the center of the main passageway, head high, being as conspicuous as possible, moving with confidence as if he had every right to be there. Ahead of him was the first automated security gate. Foot traffic moved through it uninterrupted, the scanners silently identifying every proximity chip that passed. Lem wondered what would happen if his chip proved to be a dud. Alarms, sirens, armed men suddenly at his side. He walked through without incident. He continued on, following the wayfinding signs to the manufacturing plant. When he stepped through the entrance, he walked out onto a platform that overlooked the assembly line where the drones were being prepped. Only the drones weren't there. The plant was empty. All of the worker bots had been pushed up against the sidewalls, leaving the floor clean and bare. Lem stared, his mind racing. Had Father moved up the schedule? Had they already launched? Should he reach out and warn Victor and Amala? He hurried to his right and took the stairs down to the plant floor, desperate to find a computer terminal. There would be tracking records, work orders, launch clearances. He booted up one of the worker bots, plugged in his holopad, and slid on his goggles. Benyawe was waiting for him on his HUD. "Show me one of the drones," she said. "I can't. They're gone." "Gone? Where?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." Lem poked his stylus through the holos in front of him, maneuvering through the operating system, clicking through files, not sure where to find what he was looking for. "You need the production schedules," said Benyawe. "You're digging around in the wrong places. These are system files." "I don't know this OS." "Then stop and let me drive." He passed control over to her and watched as the files zipped by. After a moment, she pulled up a schematic of the new glazer, spun it around and dove inside it, flying through its circuitry, pausing every now and then to examine some chip, component, or mechanism. Lem said nothing, letting her concentrate, though inside he felt a tightening grip of panic. After 2 minutes, Benyawe said, "I need to see the stability readouts and precision reports. They've made all sorts of crazy tweaks, some of them brilliant, some of them asinine. If I had to guess, I'd say these smaller models have a faster fire rate, which, considering their diminished size, would make them prone to vibrate and overheat." "Can I help you?" A voice behind Lem startled him. Lem spun around and removed his goggles. Benyawe disappeared and her audio cut from his earpiece. A short, stocky man in a static suit was regarding Lem with an air of suspicion. Half a second later, before Lem could even speak, the man's face brightened. "Mr. Jukes, we weren't expecting you." Lem smiled nonchalant. "Yes, well, my father says you've been doing great things here. I came to see the drones, but it appears I'm too late. Cleared them out hours ago. I didn't think we would make the new deadline, but when your father makes a request, we do our best to meet it." Lem dropped the act, his expression serious. "Hours ago? Where are the drones now?" The man retreated a step, his smile fading, sensing Lem's panic. "Gone, Mr. Jukes. Launched. On their way to the Formic ship." Lem flew west in his skimmer, soaring over the pockmarked surface of Luna, putting the drone plant behind him. He called Father directly, but there was no answer. He called Simona, and the music played for a full minute before he gave up and disconnected. She was either avoiding him or on another holo. Who else could he contact? Who else would have answers? The worker at the plant had been useless. "How much time do I have before the drones reach the Formic ship?" Lem had asked. "Hours? A day? What's their speed? What's their angle of approach?" "I don't know, Mr. Jukes. We only prepped them for delivery. They didn't tell us the intended flight path." "What about the pilots who are operating them? Where are they? Here on Luna? Where's the command center?" The man had cowered, backing up into a worker bot. "I don't know, Mr. Jukes. I swear. They don't tell me those things." "Where's the foreman? You have a foreman, right? Someone in charge? Someone who actually does know something?" But the foreman knew nothing. Or at least he claimed to know nothing, and Lem had left it a run. He tried Simona again, and this time she answered, her head appearing in the holo above the dash, her face flat and without emotion. Lem didn't wait for her to speak first. "Why didn't you tell me the drones had launched?" She seemed unsurprised by the question and unfazed by his tone. "I don't work for you, Lem. I'm your father's assistant. My job is to keep him informed." "You told me I had 3 more days." "I didn't lie. When I gave you that information, that was the schedule." "You knew I had people heading toward the Formics. I told you that." "No, you told me you had a team preparing to go. You didn't tell me when they were leaving." "They've already left. They're at the ship now, Simona. My father has to abort. If the drones fire on the ship, my people are dead." "Can't you contact them?" "Of course I can." "Then call them yourself and have them pull out. The drones won't reach the ship for another few hours." Lem's voice rose. "They can't pull out that fast, Simona. If they rush away from the ship, the Formics will detect their movements and blow them away. They have to move slowly, at a drift. And even if they started drifting now, they wouldn't be far enough away by the time the drones arrived. If the glaciers fight on the Formic ship, the subsequent gravity field will expand outward and consume my people and their shuttle. Are you following me here? They die if they run. They die if they drift. There's no scenario in which they survive if the drones attack. Father has to postpone. My people need days to get clear. They don't have days, Lem. They have hours. Are you listening to me? Is your mind processing the words I'm forming into sentences? The drones can't attack. The casual way she was regarding him was infuriating, as if she already knew every one of his arguments and simply didn't care. Where is my father? In a very important meeting. He can't be disturbed. He's about to be disturbed. Where is he? He's inaccessible, Lem. I'm sorry. We're talking about people's lives, Simona. My father can afford a momentary interruption. No, he can't. Not in this meeting, anyway. I'm sorry, Lem. I wish I could do more. Now you answer a question for me. How did you get inside the drone plant? I just spoke with the foreman. Who let you inside? Lem disconnected and Simona's head winked out. She wasn't going to help. He debated calling Benyawe, but then decided against it. If she knew about the launch, she'd fly into a panic, insisting that they contact Victor and Amala, which would only put them into a panic as well. No, Lem would handle this. He didn't need Benyawe barking her disapproval. That wouldn't help his anxiety or the situation. He made another holo call, this time to Father's office. No one answered, which was odd since Father had a team of secretaries on staff around the clock. It meant Simona had gotten to them already and told them to avoid his calls, or she had put a block on his holo signature. Either way, it meant she was sandbagging him. He would have to find Father himself. But where? The tunnel system was extensive, stretching for several kilometers in every direction, a labyrinth with secret wings and levels not found on any map. Father could be anywhere, or he may not be in the tunnels at all. He could be dining with a potential client in Imbrium, or visiting one of the shipyards, or 100 other places. Who are you meeting with, Father? What could be so important? The skimmer Lem was flying was a company vessel, he remembered. It was connected to the company's data system. It knew all, saw all. It was better than Simona. Computer, access today's meeting schedule for Ukojukes. I'm sorry, the woman's voice said. You do not have access privileges. Of course I don't. Father's security restrictions on me saw to that. Access the meeting schedule for Simona Moratti, he said. I'm sorry, you do not have access privileges. He exhaled. This wasn't going to work. The answer was there in front of him, he just couldn't reach it. Computer, check dinner reservations throughout Imbrium in the name of Ukojukes. He doubted the company's data system could access every restaurant in the city, but he knew the company had relationships with the finer establishments, the kind of places Father would go. He had seen Simona make reservations with her holopad. No matches found, said the computer. What about reservations in the name of Simona Moratti? No matches found. Again, another strikeout. There had to be another way. Computer, can you access the security cameras throughout headquarters? Affirmative. Can you identify the location of a specific employee? Only if the employee's face is currently within view. Otherwise, I can only approximate a location based on the last recorded sighting or based on the last use of the employee's proximity chip. Can you identify the location of my father, Ukojukes? Affirmative. Where is he? You do not have clearance for that information. Lem swore. Override clearance restriction. Permission denied. Lem was ready to hit the dash when he remembered that he did have clearance. He had purchased it. Computer, how are you identifying me right now? Voice recognition. Lem Jukes, Executive Director of Mining Innovation, Kuiper Belt Division. Cancel voice recognition. Identify me based on my proximity chip only.
Done. May I be of further assistance?
Give me the current location of Uko Jukes.
Uko Jukes is in the executive dining room. Seagate access room 1345.
Lem changed course and accelerated towards Seagate. He arrived moments later, parked the skimmer, and took back passages toward the dining room. Knowing Simona, she would have taken every precaution. If she had alerted the secretaries at Father's office, she had likely sent similar warnings to Father's security detail. Keep your eyes open for Lem. If he shows up, politely deny him access. Or, knowing Simona's dark mood at the moment, maybe she had ordered them not to be polite. Either way, Lem wasn't going through the front door. The staff entrance was at the back of the kitchen, accessible via a side corridor off the main tunnel. A crowd of chefs in stiff white uniforms looked up from their work when Lem entered. Lem smiled and sidled past them, heading for the double doors that led to the dining room. No one spoke or tried to stop him. The company had spared no expense on the dining room, a lavishly decorated space with a vaulted ceiling and chandeliers. There were over a dozen tables, but only one of them was occupied. Father sat across from a woman in conservative business attire. Lem didn't recognize her, but he knew at once that she was here on business, and not as Father's date. Father would never pursue a woman so close to his own age and with such plain features. Lem squared his shoulders, buttoned his suit coat, and approached them, smiling pleasantly. "Father, I'm so glad I found you. Could you and I speak in private for a moment regarding a most urgent matter?" The surprise on Father's face was replaced with a forced smile of barely contained fury. "Lem, this is very unexpected." Lem turned to the woman. She had a pin of the American flag on the lapel of her jacket. A politician, most likely, though Lem had no idea who. A congresswoman, perhaps, or someone from the current administration. Why was Father meeting with the Americans? He extended a hand. "Lem Jukes." She shook his hand, showing no sign of irritation. "Margaret Hopkins, U.S. State Department. And you hardly need to introduce yourself to me, Mr. Jukes. I've seen several of the interviews you've given on the nets. That must have been a harrowing experience to face the Formics and the Kuiper Belt." "I don't recommend it," said Lem. "A summer cabin with a nice mountain breeze is more to my liking." He turned to Father, impatient. "A moment, Father." Uko Jukes dabbed at the corner of his mouth with a napkin and leaned forward in his seat. "Miss Hopkins and I were having a private conversation, Lem. Perhaps you and I can talk after." "You can't wait. Would you excuse us, Ms. Hopkins?" Lem gestured to a door across the room that led into a parlor. Father considered a moment, forced a polite smile, then stood and followed. The parlor was 4 times the size of the dining room. Rustic leather furniture, Persian rugs, shelves filled with antique paper, books. When the doors were closed behind them, Father said, "You have 10 seconds to explain yourself." "You launched drones at the Formic mothership. You need to recall them. I have people there now." Father showed no surprise. "I know about Victor and Amala, Lem, and I'm not recalling the drones." It took a moment for Lem to find words. "You know about them? And you're going to let them die?" "They died the moment they launched, son. They were taking on an alien ship with tech far greater than anything the human mind has ever conceived. Victor is 18 years old, practically a child. Imal is an auditor. These aren't soldiers, Lem." "Victor is intelligent, Father. He's resourceful." "Simona is resourceful. A 3-legged dog is resourceful. That doesn't mean we should launch them into space and expect them to defeat an army. Victor has a personal vendetta against us. Imala Bootstamp is no butter. She threw away her career to go to war with me. And you want to protect these people? Does it matter who they are if they defeat the Formics?" Father laughed. Do you honestly think that's even possible? They're fools if they think they can take out that ship, and you're a bigger fool for believing them. At least let them try. What have we got to lose? Father looked incredulous. Do you watch the news, Lem? Are you even aware of what's going on in the world? People are dying by the millions. Old, young, women, children. They're hit with the formic gases and their flesh melts off their bones. Guangzhou, Foshan, all along southeast China. How long do you want me to wait exactly? Because every second I do, for every moment I keep those drones waiting, more people are going to die. Scientists, doctors, engineers, people a hell of a lot more resourceful than Victor Delgado. Is that what you're proposing to me? That I sit back and let that happen? Let thousands and maybe tens of thousands of people on Earth die so I can give more time to 2 people who have no chance of getting out of that formic ship alive anyway? Is that what you're suggesting? Am I reading your logic right? Because if so, Lem, then I wasted a hell of a lot of money on your education, because that's bad math. 2 people are not greater than thousands. Lem said nothing. Uko exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. I'm proud of you for taking the initiative, son. You had good intentions, but the problem is bigger than you think. I know how big the problem is, Father, and saving Victor and Amala isn't the only reason why I'm here. The glazer is unstable. You can't fire it this close to Earth. Father rolled his eyes. This again. Ben Yahweh has seen the schematics. The design is flawed. Blowing up Earth won't exactly save us from the formics. Father was suddenly angry. Do you take me for a fool, Lem? Do you have such a low impression of my intelligence that you think I would not take precautions? If one of the glazers were to misfire, we would terminate the drone from our position here on Luna. They're not on pre-programmed flights. We control them here. The misfires aren't the real problem, said Lem. It's the well-aimed firings I'm worried about. We have no idea what will happen if we hit the formic ship. It has mass. The resultant gravity field will expand outward exponentially, consuming everything in its path. I saw it happen. We blasted an asteroid in the Kuiper belt much smaller than the formic ship, and the subsequent gravity field grew so fast and so large that it nearly consumed our ship and killed us all. The formic ship will likely react the same way. If you hit it with 50 glazers, it could create a gravity field that reaches Earth and rips the planet apart. You're describing highly unlikely probabilities, Lem. You're pulling at straws. Talk to Dr. Ben Yahweh if you don't believe me. Or to Dublin. Get their opinion if you don't want mine. Father was quiet a moment. Are you finished? Because I have a meeting to return to. He wasn't going to abort, Lem realized. He was going to do what he always did, ignore anyone who disagreed with him. And let me give you some unsolicited advice, Lem. Don't send a message to Victor and Amala. Don't warn them. That would be cruel. You'd essentially be telling them they have a few hours to live. Not telling them is cruel as well. Dying is what's cruel, son. Protecting someone from the knowledge of their own death is a mercy. Stay silent, for their sake. You may think that monstrous, but it's a kindness. Uko turned and walked out. Lem stood there, considering, alone. He pulled his holopad from his pocket and prepared to call Ben Yahweh, imagining how the conversation would go. Then he pocketed the pad and looked for another exit. Father was right. He couldn't save Victor and Amala. Silence was the only kindness he had left to give.
Chapter 4. Gravity. The formic was down on its arms and legs inside the shaft, pulling a metal cart behind it. Victor caught himself on the walls before colliding with it, his helmet less than a meter from the creature's face. Victor rolled to the side to avoid it, fumbling for his weapon. The gun was up and in his hand an instant later, but his finger paused on the trigger. The formic wasn't paying him any attention, Victor realized. It hadn't so much as flinched or turned in his direction. Instead, it continued down the shaft, moving past him with slow, methodical steps, showing no signs of alarm. It was then that Victor noticed the metal plate over the formic's eyes, a sort of half-helmet that obstructed its vision like blinders. It didn't see me, Victor realized. I was simply in its path over the track. The cart was an odd thing, boxy, metallic, and covered with rust, without any lights or visible tech along its surface. Its 4 sets of ancient, corroded wheels fit snugly into the recessed grooves of the floor and ceiling, keeping the cart securely locked on the track. The wheels squeaked and jostled as they rolled over minor bumps and imperfections on the surface. A harness around the formic's midsection locked into the track beneath it and prevented the creature from going anywhere but forward. 2 poles extended back from the sides of the harness and fastened to the cart like traces. One of the formic's hind legs was injured, Victor noticed. It bent outward instead of inward, forcing the formic to walk with an awkward, limping gait that made Victor almost pity the thing. When it had moved on and Victor had lowered the gun, Imala whispered, "Are you hurt?" Victor holstered the weapon. "Scared witless, maybe, but unhurt." "What was it pulling? Could you see in the cart?" "No. All the sides were sealed. At least we know now what the tracks are for and what was making the squeaking noise." "I don't get it, Vico. Where's the tech? These are supposed to be an advanced species, and yet so far all we've seen is floating excrement and carts that would predate our industrial revolution." "It didn't see us, Imala. That's all I care about. The blinders over its eyes, though, that doesn't make sense. It's as if it were a beast of burden." "Maybe it is," said Victor. "Did you notice it limping? Maybe maimed formics are relegated to manual labor jobs. Maybe everyone has a duty, and if you're injured and can no longer perform your duty, they turn you into a mule. That hardly sounds like a civilized society." "Who said they were civilized? They're murdering planet thieves, Imala. You've seen the vids. They don't care about their own well-being. They only act in the interest of the group, the many. If he's told to be a mule, he'll be a mule." "How do you know it was a he? Maybe that was a she." Victor smiled. "I'm perfectly aware that women can do manual labor, Imala. I'm not sexist." He pushed off again, continuing up the shaft, putting the formic behind him. "I'm not suggesting that you are, Vico. I was making a point about the formics. They all look the same to me. Male, female, I can't tell the difference. Maybe we haven't seen any females yet. Maybe all of the soldier formics sent to Earth were males." "Why males?" said Imala. "Females can be warriors, too. In fact, from a biological perspective, the female is more often the protector of the young. The male usually does his business in the mating process and leaves." "Well, you know men, Imala. Only good for one thing." "I'm serious, Vico. Your family called the formics hormigas, ants. And who leads an ant colony? A queen. The males are merely her workers. Same with bees and wasps. Just because they loosely resemble ants, Imala, and I emphasize the word loosely, that hardly means they function like an ant colony. Maybe all the formics we've seen are females, or maybe they have 7 sexes, or just one. Who cares? What does it matter?" "Of course it matters. It absolutely matters. If you don't understand your enemy, how can you possibly hope to defeat him? What is the hierarchy here, for example? Who relegated that formic to cart work? Who gives the orders? We're here to take out the leader if we can, and yet we have no way of identifying him or her. They don't wear uniforms, so there's no visible rank classification. How are we supposed to fulfill our objective if we haven't the foggiest idea what we're looking for?" "The leader will be at the helm," said Victor. "Maybe," said Imala. We're not even sure if there is a helm. We know next to nothing. We know they're killing people on Earth, Imala. That's information enough for me." She didn't argue further, but Victor knew her well enough to know she had plenty more to say. After another 10 minutes, the curvature of the floor leveled off, and the end of the tunnel came into view. Victor couldn't see much of what was beyond the shaft, other than bright light, crossbeams, and a hint of the wall on the opposite side 100 meters away. Whatever the room was, it was wide and colossal. "Is that the helm?" Imala asked. "Doubt it," said Victor. "I've been moving parallel to the hull toward the back of the ship, not toward the center." His external mic was picking up noise now. At first he thought it might be mechanical, bots perhaps, or machines pumping and hammering, working in unison. But the more he listened, the more he realized there was no order to the noise, no rhythm of operations, no repeated sequence of sounds that come from machines doing a task, over and over again. No, this noise was too random, too scattered, like the sound of people at work. The clang of metal, the hiss of saws, the grinding and turning of heavy equipment. There were formics in that space, he realized, and lots of them. He inched his way forward toward the end of the shaft. The lip of the shaft was rounded, and the track ran over the lip and downward, disappearing from view. Victor reached out, grabbed the edge, and pulled himself forward just as another formic appeared, crawling up into the shaft in front of him, barreling its way inside, changing its orientation 90 degrees to enter the shaft. Victor had only a moment to push off the floor at an angle and get clear. He initiated his glove and toe magnets mid-flight and stuck to the opposite wall. The formic clawed its way farther into the shaft, feet scrabbling at the divots beside the track to get purchase. The cart followed it in, metal squeaking and screaming as the anchor rod scraped against the inside of the track. Like the other formic, this one wore blinders over its face and continued into the darkness without seeming to notice Victor was there. Victor clung to the wall and waited until the creature was out of sight before crawling back to the lip of the shaft. The room that opened up before him was larger than any enclosed space he had ever been in, like the vast domed stadiums of Earth. It was oval in shape, like the inside of an egg, and its walls were lined with cart tracks that led to dozens of different shafts, much like his own. Cart-pulling formics were everywhere, moving along the tracks, all held in place by their harnesses and anchor rods. The center of the room was a massive space filled with large chunks of ship wreckage. Victor's heart sank when he realized what it was. It was the Italians all over again, a nightmare revisited. Cabins, engines, helms, cockpits, fuselages, fuel tanks, all twisted and broken and ripped apart. Imala sounded nervous. "What is that, Pico?" "It's wreckage, Imala. It's the debris of destroyed human ships." She was quiet a moment. "How is that even possible?" Victor turned to the left and saw a massive aperture on the wall, currently closed. They must have brought the big pieces in from outside through that aperture. "Yes, but where did the debris come from? How could they recover it? Is this from the ships that attacked them here in orbit? The cannons destroyed those ships. They obliterated them. The pieces exploded and flew off into space." "Well, they obviously recovered some of the pieces, Imala. Look at that chunk of hull plating there. It has the American flag on the side. That's from the American fleet." He zoomed in with his visor to show her. The flag was scorched and the metal was twisted, but there was no denying the red and white stripes and blue box of stars. "Not all of these are military vessels, though," said Victor. "Look, see those pieces there?" He zoomed in on another hunk of debris. "That's free miner design. That's from a digger, Imala. That's a clan ship." "I don't understand," said Imala. "Free miners haven't attacked the formics." "Not here they haven't. Not in near-Earth orbit." What are you saying? That some of these ships are from the belt? And the Kuiper belt, said Victor. They have to be. That's not possible, Vigo. The Formics were coming in hot. They were decelerating the whole time, but they were never slow enough to recover anything. They didn't have to, Imala. The pieces followed them in. Remember the vids Lem showed us of the Battle of the Belt? When the Formics destroyed some of the ships, several pieces of the wreckage got caught in a magnetic field behind the ship. The field wasn't strong enough to seize the pieces and pull them behind the ship like the tail of a comet, but the field was strong enough to influence the trajectory of the wreckage and put it on the same course as the Formic ship. So this wreckage followed the Formics to Earth? They've been dragging debris across the entire system? Victor didn't answer. The full implication of what he was saying had just taken root in his mind. What if a piece of El Cavador is here, Imala? What if part of my family's ship got caught in that field and pulled to Earth? Or worse, what if someone from El Cavador is here? It was unlikely, he knew, but he couldn't deny the possibility. Lem had said that during the battle in the Kuiper Belt, the Formics had flung the men of El Cavador away from the Formic ship and out into space. That wouldn't put them behind the ship and anywhere near the magnetic field, but what if the Formics had thrown at least one person in that direction? And what if that one person had been Father? No, it wasn't possible. The Formic ship was moving too quickly. Even if a scrap of El Cavador or someone from the ship had been snagged, course-corrected by the field and sent toward Earth, that scrap or person would still be in space and moving in this direction months or years behind the Formics. Plus, the farther away they were when the magnetic field pulled them, the less likely they were to hit Earth. Any deviation in their course, however minute, would send them millions of clicks from here. No, Father was not in this wreckage. Nothing from El Cavador was. The free miners' scraps here had to be from ships in the inner belt. Nothing else would have reached Earth this soon. And yet, despite that, despite the logic of it, Victor wanted to leap out from his concealed position and rummage through every scrap of wreckage he could find, just to prove to himself that he was right. The Formics put an end to that notion. There were 6 of them to his far left, clinging to a chunk of debris. 3 more were attached to a bigger piece below his position, hammering, cutting, inspecting, disassembling. And those were the ones he could see. There were likely others, hidden among the various pieces. "What are they doing?" asked Imala. "Salvaging anything useful," said Victor, "looking for parts, hunting for metals that they can melt down and forge differently, exactly what humans do when we find a derelict ship." Ahead of him, a large chunk of wreckage rotated, revealing 2 Formics clinging to the backside. They crawled along it, spinning it in 0G, until they revealed a small cockpit with a dead human pilot inside. "Victor, I see it." The man was slumped forward in his seat, his helmet obscuring his face. The Formic scurried to the cockpit and began cutting the canopy away using small devices concealed in their grip. When the canopy was free, they cut the man's straps and restraints and pulled him from the cockpit. The back of the man's helmet had an oxygen tube tethered to the ship, and one of the Formics severed it with a single swipe of his cutting tool. The other Formic removed the man's helmet. The pilot was young, with close-cropped hair and a small frame. The Formics removed his flight suit as quickly as someone peeling a fruit, as if they had done this many times before. Next came his inner garment, until they had his chest and stomach exposed. Before Victor knew what was happening, the Formics cut the pilot open across his lower abdomen and reached up inside him. Imala gave a sharp intake of breath. Globules of blood seeped out and floated in the air. The Formics rooted around for a moment, then removed their bloody hands and pushed the man aside, done with him. They scurried away until they found something else that caught their interest. Then they hunkered down and began cutting again. "What just happened?" said Imala. Victor watched the limp, eviscerated body of the pilot float away from the wreckage. "They were looking for something," he said. "When they didn't find it, they moved on." "Get back to the shuttle, Vico. This is too big for us. It's too dangerous." "I'm already here, Imala." "You don't even know where here is." Victor looked to his right. "Those shafts up there, they point toward the center of the ship." "If I can get to one of them—" "You can't," said Imala. "It's too bright in here. You'll be exposed. There are at least 20 Formics who could see you. You'd never reach the shaft. And even if you did, you have no idea where it leads. Also, they're eviscerating people in there. So I'd say it's a lost cause." Victor poked his head out of the shaft and looked down. A few meters below him, a Formic pulled a cart to the right, heading toward the distant shafts. "I could hitch a ride, Imala. I could grab onto a cart, use it as a shield, and let the Formic pull me to the shaft. I'm weightless. The Formic wouldn't notice." "Listen to me, Vico. We did our best here. We got some intel, and now it's time to take it to those who can use it. We've gone as far as we can." "We've got nothing, Imala." "We found some glow bugs and the cargo bay. That's strategically useless. We need intel with military significance. Something that a strike team can use to disable the ship." "I thought we were the strike team." "We are, but if we fail..." "We won't fail if we survive. Now turn your butt around and get to the shuttle before you're seen." He looked below him again. The Formic and its cart were almost past him. His window of opportunity was closing. "I'm going for it, Imala." He muted her audio before she could object. Then he scanned the debris in front of him. The Formics were busy at their tasks, not looking in his direction. Victor took 2 quick breaths, found his courage, and then crawled out of the shaft and down toward the cart, like a spider, clinging to the wall with his toe and glove magnets. For one terrifying moment, the duffel bag on his back caught up with him and shifted his momentum just as he was reaching out with his hand and foot. He instinctively blinked out a command to increase the magnet's power, and his hand and foot slammed into the wall with a deafening clang. He clung there a moment, his heart hammering, not moving, praying that no one had heard. If so, all was lost. He was in plain sight, a sitting duck. He relaxed the power to the magnets and got moving again, scurrying now, eager for the partial concealment of the cart. Seconds later he reached it. He grabbed the front of it on the right side and then brought his knees up to his chest in a fetal position to make himself as small as possible. It wasn't enough, though. The cart was only 2/3 his size, and his shoulder and buttocks and the top of his helmet were sticking out for all to see. The duffel bag on his back wasn't helping, jutting out behind him like a turtle's shell. If seen from the other side of the cart, he might go unnoticed, but if anyone looked in his direction from a high angle, it was over. They would come for him, cutters out, maws open, hands bloody. The Formic pulling the cart paused, and for a terrifying heartbeat Victor thought it had detected him. Then it lowered its head and pulled harder, as if adjusting to the nearly imperceptible increase in mass of its cargo. It was not a fast Formic, Victor soon discovered. Each step was deliberate and labored. Victor's eyes traced the track in front of him, calculating the distance to the shaft far ahead. At this rate, they wouldn't reach it for another 10 minutes or more. That was too much time. He wouldn't go unnoticed for that long. A light on his HUD was flashing. It was Imala trying to get his attention. He debated keeping her muted until he reached the shaft, but the flashing light became more insistent. And eventually he gave in and reopened her audio. She was yelling, frantic, mid-sentence, "Extended all the way! They've all extended!" Imala, slow down. "What's extended?" "The cannons! I see 8 of them extended. No, 9! Cannons? Formic cannons, Vico, outside the ship. The one over the hole, it's extended too. Something is coming. I've got movement on my eye. Over 40 contacts heading toward us." You mean ships? Fanned out, coming from multiple angles, 160 clicks out and moving in fast. A fleet, Victor realized, an attack. But who would be attacking? The Americans had already lost their fleet. Who else had that many weaponized fighters? "The Formics are firing," said Imala. "Show me," said Victor. A vid feed appeared on his HUD. A half-dozen of the Formic cannons were in view, each of them slinging pellets of green plasma into space in a steady stream of glowing destruction. "Show me the contacts," said Victor. A second window appeared on his HUD, showing blinking dots moving toward a center target. The fighters were coming in hot, but the cannons were picking them off easily. 2 of the dots winked out, then 3, 6. They were nimble things, Victor saw. They juked right, then left, spinning and dodging in a way Victor didn't think possible, but the pellets persisted, and one by one the dots on his screen winked out, until only 6 remained. "Who are they, Imala?" "No idea. The eye can't identify them." On Victor's HUD, one of the remaining 6 fighters disappeared, destroyed, then another, leaving only 3. "What do we do?" asked Imala. The panic in her voice had been replaced with a calm resignation. Victor would never make it to the shuttle in time, and they both knew it. The fighters would fire on the ship with their nukes long before Victor was halfway up the shaft. And if he ran for it and the fighters failed, then he would have revealed himself to the Formics in the cargo bay for no reason. No, if he moved, he was dead. And anyway, even if he could make it to the shuttle, it would only be to die with Imala instead of alone. Any blast from the Formic ship would kill them both. He wanted to say something comforting to Imala, an expression of gratitude perhaps, or an apology for dragging her into this, the kind of parting words that people share when death is imminent. He owed her that much. But every sentence that formed in his head felt trite and awkward and overly dramatic. So he said nothing. On the vid feed, one of the Formic cannons slammed into the hull in a twisted heap, like a metal can suddenly crushed by a giant invisible boot. Then another cannon crumpled, and another. "What's happening, Imala?" "I don't know. The cannons are collapsing." "They can't collapse. There's no gravity." And then there was gravity, all around him. One second he was weightless, the next he was pressed flat against the side of the cart, heavy and disoriented, the weight of the duffel bag and all of the tools crushing him. The debris in the center of the room fell all at once, a mountain of wreckage crashing down, crushing Formics, banging and colliding in a deafening boom. The Formic pulling the cart was now tipped far to one side away from the wall, nearly upside down, its legs flailing, trying to get purchase. If not for the anchor bar still locking it to the track, it would have plummeted downward. Every part of Victor felt as if it were being crushed. His organs were heavy in his gut. His muscles were pressing down upon his bones. His helmet, his suit, everything was smothering him, squeezing him. The world became fuzzy and dark at the edges. He was blacking out. Imala was yelling in his ear. The cart suddenly shifted, bending downward, tilting to the side, nearly dumping him off. Victor scrambled to hold on, suddenly awake, the impossibly heavy mass that was his body sliding toward the edge. His hands clung to one of the cart's traces, his feet dangling, his grip sliding downward inch by inch. He could see far below him. 50 meters down the ship, debris had clustered into a pile of twisted metal and jagged points, like a mountain of dirty knives waiting to receive him. The duffel bag, by some miracle, had snagged on a corner of the cart and now rested on the cart's side above him. The strap of the bag, tight around Victor's chest, was all that kept him from falling off. He needed to secure himself another way, he realized, to get a better grip on the traces, lock himself into the wall somehow. If the bag tore loose, the weight of the tools would pull him down like a stone. He tried readjusting his grip so he could free his other hand to reach back and unstrap the bag. But then the anchor rod bent again with a screech of twisting metal and the cart tipped downward. The duffel bag slipped free and slammed into him, knocking Victor free. Arms flailing, he reached out, grabbed nothing but air, and fell.
Chapter 5. Alliance. Just outside the city of Leauge, at the foothills of the Nanling Mountains in southeast China, Mazer Rackham sat cross-legged on the dirt floor of his tent, eyes closed, back straight, deep in meditation. He was aware of everything around him. The cot to his right, the wind on his face and bare chest blowing in gently from the open tent flap, the warmth of the sun, the dirt and grass and pebbles beneath him, the soldiers and vehicles moving about the camp, the 4 armed Chinese guards outside the tent, each ready to shoot him should he try to escape. Mazer inhaled deep, exhaled slowly. His Maori mother had taught him to believe in Tekore, the void, the place unseen, the realm beyond the world of everyday experience, an existence between non-being and being, the realm of potential being. Mazer knew he was well below his potential at the moment. His body was not as strong as it had been. His abdominal wound had sapped him of energy and strength. Nor was his mind as clear as it should be. The deaths of his crew and companions still swirled in his mind like a storm. Patu, Fatani, and Reinhardt, killed when the Formics shot down their Herc. Then Danwen, the grandfather who had tended Mazer's wounds, and now Kalinga was gone as well, vaporized in the nuke detonation. The loss of them all left an emptiness inside him, as if a plug had been pulled from his foot and a portion of his soul had drained out of him like water. No, not soul, mana. Energy, essence, power, the presence of the natural world, that's what had flowed out of him. That's what the Wakapapa taught, what Mother had whispered in his ears at night as a child as she tucked him into bed. We are all brothers and sisters, Mazer. People, birds, the fishes, trees. All of this is family. All of this is Wenao. His father had called it nonsense. He had never said so while Mother was still fighting cancer, but Father had made his feelings plain enough after she had died. He never forbade Mazer from believing, but Father's skepticism and disdain for it was so thick and bitter and obvious that Mazer had abandoned it for no other reason than to remove anything in their lives that might keep him and Father apart. But now here Mazer was, drained of mana, sapped of his essence. The rational, educated side of his mind, the side shaped by Father and books and computers, said that such thoughts were ridiculous. The mystical Maori mana was a thing of fiction, a fool's hope, a religion born of ignorance. Yet there was a stronger voice inside Mazer, a voice that clung to the notion, Mother's voice, soft and gentle and layered in love. A voice that told him to believe. He had not entertained such thoughts for many years. Mazer's faith had died when Mother did. And yet he couldn't deny that something had leaked out of him. He could feel the vacancy as assuredly as he felt the ground beneath him. And until mana flowed back into him, he could not be who he was, who he should be. His mind was clear on that point, unless he found mana. Unless it flowed back into him, he would continue as a lesser form of himself. He opened his eyes and dug at the dirt. He found a pebble just below the surface, no bigger than a pill. He lifted his canteen off the cot and poured water over the small stone, rubbing it between his fingers to clean it of dirt. In the school of learning, the Ware Winanga, a student swallowed a small pebble, a watu, in the initiation ceremony. It was believed that by swallowing the stone, a student established the conditions whereby mana could flow into that person in the form of knowledge. Mazer placed the stone on his tongue took a drink of water, and swallowed. It was not foolishness, he told himself. He had done this eagerly as a child, swallowing the water so quickly that some of it had gone down the wrong pipe and sent him into a fit of coughing. Mother had watched from the front row of the cultural center, beaming with pride. And hadn't he felt stronger after the ceremony? Hadn't he flexed his arms and told Mother that yes, he could feel it now? He was stronger. And she had laughed and taken a knee in front of him and told him how proud she was of her little warrior. Mazer had felt such a rush of love in that moment that the memory of it even now caused his cheeks to burn. If that wasn't mana, he didn't know what was. A jeep came to a stop in front of his tent, tires squishing in the mud. Mazer watched as Captain Shenzhou of the People's Liberation Army got down from the driver's seat, approached Mazer's tent, and stepped inside. Shenzhou's camouflaged field uniform was a mottled mix of browns and greens, with his rank on his collar and the red star of the Chinese military embroidered on his upper right sleeve. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. "General Sima requests your presence," Shenzhou said in English. "Please put on a shirt and come with me." Mazer's shirt lay on his cot. He had removed it before his meditation and exercise. Prior to the crash, he could do 100 push-ups without slowing his pace or breaking much of a sweat, but now he could barely do 20 without the pain in his abdomen lighting up like a flare. He got to his feet and picked up the shirt. Shenzhou winced and gestured to the red, jagged scar across Mazer's midsection. "That's a nasty cut, Captain, and recent by the look of it." Mazer pulled the shirt down over his head and covered the scar. "Our Herc was shot down near Dawanzhen by a swarm of Formic fighters. I was the lucky one." Shenzhou's expression softened. "And your crew? Patu, Fatani, and Reinhardt?" Shenzhou knew their names, of course. It was Shenzhou who had come to New Zealand before the war and convinced Mazer's superiors at the New Zealand Special Air Service to conduct a joint training exercise with the Chinese military. And it was Shenzhou who had hand-picked Mazer and his crew for the task. The deal was simple. Mazer and his team would teach Chinese pilots how to fly the Herc, a new experimental anti-grav aircraft, and the NZSAS would get a few free aircraft for their trouble. "My crew died on impact," said Mazer. Shenzhou looked genuinely regretful. "You have my condolences, Captain. They were good soldiers." "Thank you," said Mazer. And yes, they were. A silence stretched between them until Shenzhou said, "I suppose I am partly responsible for their deaths. I brought them to China, after all." "You didn't know what was coming," said Mazer. "The Formics killed them, not you. Though you did threaten to shoot us down." Shenzhou nodded. "You and your team had stolen a Herc, expensive government property. You had no authority to fly off base." "We were helping civilians," said Mazer. "My superiors were afraid your flight path would be seen as an act of aggression against the Formics and instigate a conflict. There are still some officers who believe that's what happened." "Is that what you think?" Mazer asked. Shenzhou hesitated, then shook his head. "No. The Formics had already killed hundreds of civilians when they landed. Threatening to shoot you down was a mistake." "What about arresting me and Captain O'Toole?" asked Mazer. "Was that a mistake as well? Are you intending to punish us for destroying one of the Formic landers? For helping your people?" Shenzhou turned his body toward the open tent flap and gestured toward the jeep. "General Sima is the man to answer that question. Shall we?" They climbed up into the jeep and drove north through camp, maneuvering through a sea of tents, the bustle of camp all around them. Trucks and four-wheelers slogged through the mud. A team of mechanics huddled around a half-disassembled transport. Medics treated the wounded at a field hospital. Soldiers formed lines at mess halls and latrines. Trucks were being fueled and serviced. Equipment was being checked and rechecked. Loads were being tied down. They even passed a pickup game of baseball, where soldiers swung a broomstick bat at a wadded ball of socks. "How many men are here?" asked Mazer. "Close to 11,000, said Shenzhou. "The camp extends for almost 2 kilometers west of us, all the way to the Qinglian Expressway." He pointed to their right. The easternmost boundary of camp is the Leauge River, and just beyond that is the city of Leauge, where General Sima has established his command post. It wasn't much of a city in Mazer's opinion. There were no high-rises, no industrial complexes, at least not along the western back of the river. Nor were there any people, from what Mazer could see. All the streets and shops along the river were vacant and quiet. "Has the city been evacuated?" Mazer asked. "The military ordered them north shortly after the invasion," said Shenzhou. "It wasn't safe for them here, and the city is an important strategic position. The Qingyan Expressway is a supply line from the north. It's one of the few highways that has been cleared of abandoned vehicles for the Army's use. It takes a lot of vehicles to move an army this size. Plus, the city itself is a good source of food, blankets, communication devices, and other supplies. General Sima has crews collecting anything that might be useful as we speak. He's plundering the city. General Sima's actions are in the best interest of the people," said Shenzhou. "If the military isn't equipped, it can't protect the citizenry. And remember, this is China, Captain. Everything belongs to the Republic anyway." Ethics aside, it was a smart strategy, Mazer had to admit. Traditional supply lines weren't an option at the moment. Roads were out, the army was fragmented. Sima couldn't count on resupply trucks reaching him, particularly if he intended to move south, where the Formics were aggressively gassing cities. Those sites would be quarantined, everything would be contaminated. Water, food, and supplies found there would be worthless. Stocking up in Lanzhou was necessary. Shenzhou stopped the jeep outside a tent where 4 armed guards stood at attention. "Stay here," he said. He hopped out, approached the guards, and presented his credentials. The lieutenant stepped aside, and Shenzhou entered the tent. A moment later, he returned with Captain Whit O'Toole, who looked unhurt but in desperate need of a shave. "I'm glad to see you still alive," said Mazer. "That makes 2 of us," said Whit. He climbed into the back seat, and Shenzhou was off again. "General Sima was insistent that we separate you two," said Shenzhou. "I apologize for the inconvenience." "Arresting us is what's inconvenient," said Whit. "We're wasting precious time, Captain. We should be attacking the other 2 landers. Once the Formics figure out how we destroyed the first one, once they realize the underside of the lander was their weak spot, they will take steps to shield it, and if they do, we're back to square one. We can't penetrate their shields. They'd be unstoppable." "Duly noted," said Shenzhou. "As for the other 2 landers, you need not worry. We have drill sledge teams prepping to attack as we speak." "With nukes?" asked Whit. "I don't know the details of the op," said Shenzhou. "The drill sledges won't be able to drill into the underside of the lander," said Whit. "The Formics are tunnel dwellers. The area immediately below the lander will be dug out. We had to shoot molten ejecta at the hull and burn our way in. Captain Rackham and I should debrief whoever is leading the op." "General Tang has that duty," said Shenzhou. "And knowing General Tang, he will not want your assistance. Our orders are to take out the Formic death squads gassing cities in the south." Shenzhou reached the main road and turned east, heading toward the bridge that traversed the Liangjiang River and led into the city. "How is General Sima intending to take down the death squads?" asked Mazer. "Each Formic is armed with a sprayer, and you need not inhale the gas for it to be fatal. If it merely touches your exposed skin, you're dead." "We learned that the hard way," said Shenzhou. "We lost thousands of soldiers at the beginning. Beijing has now given the order that no soldier should engage the Formics without a full biosuit and oxygen. In theory, that's a good policy, but it's unrealistic. There aren't enough suits and O2 to go around, not even close. We can't outfit 20% of our army. The suits simply don't exist. That many were never manufactured. No one ever imagined we would need that many." "What about the Formic gas?" asked Mazer. "If we can find a way to neutralize it, we would remove the threat entirely." "We're working on a counteragent," said Shenzhou. "The military established a Level 4 containment facility here in Liangzhou. General Sima has a team of bioengineers there studying samples of the gas." "Who are the researchers?" asked Whit. "Military? Mostly. There are a few civilians as well, specialists brought in from Hong Kong at the Politburo's insistence." "Where did they get samples of the gas?" asked Mazer. Initially, we had bioweapons experts collecting gas in the field, said Shenzhou. They sucked up pockets of it from the air or wiped up residue that had settled onto surfaces or standing water. He shook his head. It didn't work, though. The collected samples were too dissipated at that point, too mixed with our airborne molecules, making it near impossible to isolate the alien compounds. They needed the gas in a more condensed form, they realized. You went after the goo guns, said Mazer. The sprayers the Formic death squads carry. The weapons were of a simple design. Each consisted of a tube-shaped backpack attached to a long metal wand the Formic swung lazily back and forth, killing everything in its path. It was not unlike the sprayers pest controllers used, a fact Mazer had found morbidly ironic. Now the bugs were spraying us. Taking them hasn't been easy, said Shenzhou. The Formics collect their dead. As soon as we kill one, a swarm of them sweep in on skimmers and gather up the corpse and its weapons. It's almost as if they know instantly when one of their kind falls. How many goo guns have you collected? Asked Mazer. Not enough, said Shenzhou. The jeep reached a checkpoint at the bridge's entrance, and the soldier on duty waved them through. They crossed the bridge and made their way into Leauge. The city was empty and eerily quiet. The people had left in a hurry, abandoning everything. An overturned stroller lay on the sidewalk. A food truck was parked at the corner, its side window open as if ready for business. Shenzhou ignored the blinking traffic lights and drove 4 blocks east to the municipal building, a bland 2-story concrete structure. He parked and led them up to the 2nd floor. General Sima had commandeered a corner office with windows that afforded him a view of his camp across the river. He stood on a hollow table, studying a series of maps projected in front of him. He wiped the map's contents away as soon as Mazer and the others entered. Shenzhou approached the table, snapped to attention, saluted, and spoke in Chinese. General Sima, I present Captains Wit O'Toole and Mazer Rackham. Sima came around the table and regarded Wit and Mazer coolly. He was older than Mazer expected, mid-60s perhaps, well past retirement. His eyes were dark and full of suspicion. His brown wool uniform was stiff and unadorned, save for a single rank insignia on his right shoulder. The American and the Maori, said General Sima. He spoke English with a heavy accent. I have read your service records. You have quite the impressive list of accomplishments. Even you, Captain Rackham, whose service has been relatively short. He turned back to the table, made a hand gesture in the hollow field, and Wit's and Mazer's records appeared. General Sima scanned the documents. Captain O'Toole, former U.S. Navy SEAL, highly decorated. More successful ops on your record than most special ops soldiers have in a lifetime. And you, Captain Rackham, pilot, commendations, test scores off the charts. He turned back to them. Soldiers to the core, the both of you. And yet, despite this overwhelming evidence of heightened intelligence, you both seem to believe you can come to my country and do whatever the hell you want. He flicked his wrist and their records disappeared, replaced with a large photo of a black crater in the earth. It took Mazer a moment to understand what he was looking at. The landscape was so different from how he had seen it last. The Formic lander and adjacent mountain of biomass were obliterated. Nothing remained, save for a few scraps and pieces no bigger than Mazer's hand. General Sima faced them. You both stand accused of detonating a nuclear device on Chinese soil without the consent of this government. A capital offense. How do you plead? Is this a court-martial? Asked Wit. Of sorts. Mazer Rackham and I were acting in the best interest of China, sir. The lander was slaughtering your people. Our tactics were extreme, yes, but only because they were necessary. The lander had to be obliterated. It was a base of operations for many of the Formic transports and flyers. It was full of enemy combatants. There was a mountain of rotting corpses beside it. The whole area was an environmental disaster. You created an environmental disaster, said Sima, gesturing to the crater. It was a contained nuke, sir, said Witt. The structure took most of the blast. There will be minimal fallout. Our hope was that you would mimic our tactics and take out the other two landers. We will, said Sima. We have drill sledge teams prepping as we speak. I'm glad to hear it, said Witt. If we can be of any assistance... General Sima glowered. Do you think we would use you after you showed such contempt for our government? Contempt, sir, said Witt. Did you seek permission from the Politburo or the CMC? No. Did you defer to the military and allow us to conduct our own operations? No. Did you steal a nuclear armament from the PLA? Yes. We did not steal the nuke, sir. On that point and others, I must respectfully disagree. You collaborated with traitors in our military to acquire the nuke. That person or persons stole it from our arsenal and placed it in your hands. That makes you guilty of espionage, theft, handling a weapon of mass destruction with the intent to kill, and about 10 other national and international laws. You have spit in the face of the UN Security Council, the People's Republic of China, and my superiors. We made our intentions known on the nets, said Witt. We were never secret about our plans to take out the lander. That has been our practice from the moment we entered China, which you also did illegally, said Sima. We have always been transparent, sir, said Witt. We have constantly shared our tactics in the hope that the military would adopt our tactics that work and avoid the mistakes we've made. I am proud to say that many units in your military, including some under your command, have employed our tactics to great success. They, in turn, have shared their tactics with us, and we have executed their tactics to equal success. This has been a collaboration from the beginning. An unsanctioned collaboration, snapped Sima. Witt's voice was calm and even. Would you rather we had not killed the Formics we have, sir? Would you rather we had not destroyed the lander with its fighters and skimmers and soldiers inside? General Sima ignored the question. Who gave you the nuke? I want names. I can't give you names, said Witt. The people who helped us remained anonymous. How did they communicate with you? Through our site. Their messages self-erased after viewing. Their delivery paths were encrypted. Their login names were randomly generated. There are no breadcrumbs for you to track, sir. These people are invisible. Sima gave Witt an icy stare for a moment. Then he wiped his hand through the holofield, rummaged through a few files, and brought up a grainy satellite photo. They were looking down on a small camp near a lush jungle forest. A skimmer was parked nearby. People were gathered together in a group. Someone flew to your camp and delivered the nuke, said Sima. We have the sat photos to prove it. Who was it? I cannot say, said Witt. Can't or won't, asked Sima. No name was given, sir. A description, perhaps? There are over 4 million active personnel in the PLA, sir, said Witt. I doubt I can describe one man's features so clearly that you'll find him based on that description alone. It was a subtle bit of deception, Mazer knew. The person who had delivered the nuke was actually a woman. Witt was leading the general well off her path. We are allies in this war, General, said Witt, not enemies. You need all hands on this. The civilian casualty reports are in the tens of millions. I'm thrilled to hear there are drill sledge teams prepped to strike the landers. But even if they succeed, this war is far from over. MOPS can help. We can offer training, tactical advice, intel on Formic behavior and combat. We know how they attack, retreat, regroup. Their movements may appear random, sir, but Captain Rackham and I have recognized patterns in how they swarm. Let us combine our resources and skills, sir. We will work under your command. Under my command, you say? General Sima turned to the holofield and flicked his fingers in a pre-programmed pattern. According to the newsnets, you MOPS have been doing that all along. Several vids began playing, news feeds from around the world. Reporters and anchors of various nationalities were speaking to camera, their voices muted. They showed aerial footage of the black crater where the Formic lander had stood. They cut to photos and vids of General Sima. Mazer understood at once. They're giving you credit for the blast. General Sima flicked his hand and stopped the vids. Your fellow MOPS issued a communique to every major news organization in the world claiming that MOPS have been operating under my command all along. They say I devised every detail of the mission and supplied you with the drill sledges and the nuke. They claim the whole op was my idea. The MOPS must have learned that Mazer and I were in your custody, said Witt. They did what they thought was necessary to ensure our safety. Your safety was never threatened. My men didn't know that, said Witt. All they knew was that their commanding officer and fellow soldier had been arrested. By giving you the credit and painting us as allies, they made it impossible for you to harm us. Sima grit his teeth. They lied to the world and made me look like a fool in front of my men, all of whom know perfectly well that I had nothing to do with the destruction of the lander. If you're displeased with the communique, sir, said Witt, all you need do is deny it. Go on record with the press that it's false. Call it what it is, a lie. Tell the world you had nothing to do with the lander's destruction. In fact, were it up to you, the lander would still be standing because you would have arrested every mop at the border who dared to stick his nose in your country's business. Sima glared at him but said nothing. But before you make such an announcement, said Witt, consider what will happen if you corroborate their story. You will be an international hero, sir. The world would forever remember you as the commander who struck the first blow against the Formics. The world would remember a lie, said Sima. The world will remember what it needs to remember, sir. We are losing this war. Global morale could not be lower. Earth needed this victory, if for no other reason than to reestablish confidence in the human race. By taking responsibility, you would be doing your country and the people of Earth a great service. If you are worried about saving face with your men, tell them you had to keep the op a secret. Tell them even your closest senior officers were unaware of your plans. Tell them you had to conduct the op this way. You knew the use of nukes was illegal. You knew it would take your government far too long to approve such a strategy. Yet you couldn't stand idly by while your own people suffered. You did what you knew you must. You worked with us privately and told us your plan. You couldn't supply your own men to conduct the op. Doing so would make them complicit in your plans, which you knew were illegal. And you refused to order your men to do anything that might lead to their imprisonment. But MOPS, well, MOPS were another matter. They were already here illegally. They were already taking a great risk and demonstrating tactical expertise. Them you could use. They could execute your master plan. Sima glanced at Shenzhou as if taking note that Shenzhou was hearing all of this as well. You're suggesting I tell my men I blatantly disregarded my superiors and committed a treasonous act, said Sima. He scoffed. Yes. What a brilliant way to teach them discipline. You're teaching them what you value, sir, said Witt. You're placing the lives of your people far above your career. Your men will love you for it. I do not need to curry allegiance from my men, Captain O'Toole. Nor do I need leadership advice from you. You seem to forget that I had you both arrested. How am I to explain that in this elaborate farce of yours? Say you staged our arrest because you were unsure how the Politburo or CMC would react to the nuclear blast. By publicly arresting us, you were able to take us under your protection without arousing suspicion. Had you openly harbored us, it could have been seen as an act of defiance. Arresting us is precisely what a brilliant commander who had orchestrated this whole operation would do, sir. It allows the government to calmly consider the situation and believe you are still their man. I am still their man, said Sima. Of course you are, sir. That's my point. They now see the wisdom of your actions. He gestured to the holofield. One of those vids is your own state news site. The Politburo is already getting behind this. This is the event they have been waiting for. It sends a message to the world. China is still strong. China can win. They are making you a national hero. I suspect you have already received emails from Beijing praising you for your actions. General Sima pursed his lips and considered, a gesture that seemed to confirm with suspicion. Shenzhou stepped forward, bowed slightly, and directed his eyes at the floor. "General Sima, your humble servant requests permission to speak freely, sir." General Sima sighed and regarded Shenzhou with a tired expression. "Say what you will, Captain." Shenzhou stood erect. "General, you are more than justified in feeling wronged, sir. The lie the mops have broadcast is deceptive and unconscionable. It makes a mockery of our military and our dedication to integrity and personal ethics. I might also add, sir, that your devotion to the laws of our country is a great inspiration to this your humble servant and all those under your command who—" "Get to the point, Captain," said Sima. Shenzhou nodded. "Sir, what these men propose sounds wise to me. This gives China the victory we need. The militaries of the world regard us as weak and disorganized. Unless we prove them otherwise, their disregard for us will increase, and morale will continue to decline. Taking this recognition is not a selfish act, sir. It would be the opposite. You would be doing it for the glory of China. It would be the greatest service you have rendered in a lifetime of selfless acts and accomplishments." "My greatest act would be something I had no part in," said Sima. "Your flattery falls flat, Captain." Shenzhou bowed, eyeing the floor again. "If I may also add, General, I would be happy to corroborate your story. If asked, you can claim I was your liaison to the mops. That would add credibility to the account. The idea that you contacted the mops and coordinated with them without any assistance strains believability, sir, not because you are incapable, but because your movements and communications are so closely watched. You would need help within the military to pull this off, sir. An accomplice, preferably someone of my rank. As a captain, I am high enough in rank to go where I please, yet low enough in rank that my movements would largely go unnoticed. Your more senior officers do not have that luxury." "You will lie under oath," said Sima. "You would perjure yourself? Is that how little you regard your own honor?" "My honor is my most valued possession, sir," said Shenzhou. "Greater even than my life. By validating your story, sir, I am protecting China. Is that dishonor? To preserve one's homeland? To aid one's general? I think not. I would consider it my highest honor to stand with you and protect your good name." General Sima rubbed at his chin and was quiet a moment. "And why would I choose you as my liaison?" Shenzhou kept his eyes down. "I have worked closely with the drill sledge teams for over a year, sir. I know the tech. I also have a history with Captain Mesa Rackham, whom I brought from New Zealand to train our Herc pilots. Mine is a face he trusts. You, of course, knew all of these details, and thus called me into your office and gave me this top-secret assignment." Shenzhou bowed again and took a step back. General Sima turned to the vids still hovering above the table. After a long moment, he turned back to Wit. "What of the traitors who gave you the nuke? They will obviously know I'm lying. They could come forward and contradict my story." "They won't," said Wit. "They were never going to come forward in the first place, but they certainly can't do so now. Mops have given you the credit. This is your victory to claim." General Sima studied each of their faces, then came to a decision. "Very well. Mops have been under my command for 5 days now. Captain Shenzhou has been serving as my liaison." He turned to Shenzhou. "You will prepare a full report of the activity of those 5 days, Captain, with minutes from our meetings and details of my plans to destroy the lander." "Yes, sir," said Shenzhou. "Make sure those meetings do not contradict my actual itinerary. I don't want our fiction to have historical inaccuracies." He turned to Wit and Mazer. "In the meantime, we need to find a place for you and your men in my army. How many men are in your unit?" 18 when we left them, sir," said Wit. "Plus we have an 8-year-old boy in our company, an orphan. He sort of attached himself to our unit. We'd like to find him safe passage to a secure location away from the fighting, if possible." Sima raised a disapproving eyebrow. "You've been fighting Formix with an 8-year-old child. He's safer with us than he would be on his own, sir, said Mazer. We don't involve him in the fighting directly. We've done our best to protect him. My army is not a daycare, said Sima. He has no place here, nor can I afford to send a transport. The best I can do is find a place for him at Dragon's Den, which may be safer than going north anyway. Dragon's Den? Asked Mazer. An underground facility 100 clicks from here. It was originally designed as a safe house for senior party officials and their families in the event of a global war. Several thousand refugees have already gathered there. Local villagers mostly. The facility is well beyond capacity, but we'll find your orphan boy a cot to sleep on and food to eat. Mazer nodded. A wave of relief swelled inside him. They were going to get Bingwen to a safe place. Thank you, sir, he said. I am sending you there as well, said Sima. Both of you. He looked to Wit and then back to Mazer. If you're truly under my command now, as you say, you will follow my orders to the letter. Is that clear? Yes, sir. We have a team of bioengineers here in Leauge, developing a counter-agent for the formic gas. The CMC is of the opinion that the team is too exposed here. Their lab isn't designed to withstand a direct attack. If the formics learned of our intentions and swarmed the facility, Beijing doubts we could adequately defend them. I have therefore been ordered to move our bioengineers, their equipment, and all hazardous material to a lab at Dragon's Den. The bioengineers will continue their work there, underground. You said there were civilians there, said Wit. Is it wise to bring a lethal substance inside an enclosed space where civilians are being housed? The tunnels are vast, said General Sima. Civilians are kept in an area apart from the military and far from the lab. In the event of an emergency, the various wings can be sealed off from one another. It's not an ideal situation, I agree, but this is hardly an ideal existence we're living. You and Captain Rackham will join the armed escort taking the bioengineers to Dragon's Den. The convoy leaves tomorrow morning at 0600. You will rendezvous with the other MOPS at Dragon's Den and await further orders. Captain Shenzhou, you will accompany the escort as well. Isn't that what a MOPS liaison would do? Yes, sir, said Shenzhou. In the meantime, escort these men to the hotel where the other officers are staying. Give them each a vacant room and a fresh uniform. General Sima turned to Mazer and Wit. The hotel has hot water. It's fresh and uncontaminated. I suspect you haven't had a shower and a good night's sleep in quite some time. I suggest you take advantage. He crossed to the glass window and stood there, hands clasped behind him, looking west toward the river and the camp beyond it. Mazer was beginning to think they had been dismissed when Sima said, "Have you ever lost soldiers under your command, Captain O'Toole?" "Yes, sir," said Wit. "More than I care to admit." "And what about you, Captain Rackham?" asked Sima. "You're young. Perhaps fate has been kinder to you." Mazer's thoughts went to Patu, Fatani, and Reinhardt. Somehow he got the words out. "I have lost soldiers as well, sir." Sima nodded. To lose a soldier is a type of death. A lesser death than the one that will take us all, but a death nonetheless. If we did not feel so, I suppose we would be unfit for command. He turned and faced them. I have lost upwards of 10,000 since this war began. All of them sons and daughters to me. If we do not stop this gas, this weapon of the enemy, I will lose them all. See to it that I don't.
Chapter 6. Reinforcements. When Victor awoke in the cargo bay, he was weightless again, his arms floating out beside him in the air, his feet anchored firmly to the wall. "Victor, can you hear me?" A voice in his ear, over the radio. He blinked again, his mind still in a fog. Imala? You blacked out. Are you hurt? She was out in the shuttle. He remembered now. He had fallen from the cart, and his boot magnets had saved him. He had initiated them as he was falling, and he had kicked out frantically toward the wall until one of the boot soles had snapped against the surface and held. Gravity had swung the rest of his body downward like a pendulum, and he had slammed into the side of the wall with such force that he was certain he had broken something. "Answer me, Vico. Are you hurt?" "My ankle," he said. "I think I sprained it." The pain was throbbing and hot. "Yes, it's starting to swell," said Imala. "I have your biometrics here in front of me. I'll inflate and cool the area." Victor winced as the suit around his ankle filled with air and dropped in temperature. "You're in the open, Vico. You need to move. There's a shaft near you. Can you reach it?" Victor oriented himself and took in his surroundings. The shaft was 15 meters to his right. "Yes, I can make it." "Then move," said Imala. "You're near the debris, and one of the formics may have survived the fall." Victor turned and looked in the direction he had fallen, shocked to see how close he had come to death. The wreckage from the human ships had scrunched together into a giant mangled heap, only 10 meters from his current position. Had he fallen any farther, he would have impaled himself on a jagged piece of metal protruding from the pile. Imala was wrong, though. If there were formics in that heap, none of them could have survived. Even so, he needed to get out of the open. He bent forward, attached his glove magnets to the wall, and began to climb, wincing in pain whenever he pushed off with his left foot. He reached the shaft, climbed inside, and concealed himself in the shadows. From here he had a good view of the cargo bay. The inner wall of the bay had taken a beating from the gravity. Whole sections of wall had crumpled inward and broken free, exposing rows of tightly packed pipes underneath. The pipes all seemed to be running in the same direction from the front of the ship toward the rear. There were valves and fasteners on the pipes every few meters, and to Victor's surprise, none of the pipes appeared damaged. Elsewhere, where the inner wall had held, cart-pulling formics had gone back to work, pulling their cargo on the tracks as if nothing had happened. A few had stopped at places where the inner wall in front of them had been ripped away, leaving them no more track to walk on. They stood there, stuck, unable to advance. "What happened, Imala?" Victor asked. "Why did we suddenly have gravity in here?" "The ships that attacked must have fired a weapon that somehow created gravity inside the ship." "How is that possible?" "No idea," said Imala. "But all of the cannons on the surface of the formic ship were crushed against the hull, like tinfoil. That's why you blacked out. You were feeling too many Gs. It's a miracle your boot magnets held." "What happened to the attacking ships?" "Destroyed as well. Once the cannons were gone, the irises on the hull of the formic ship opened and unleashed the plasma. The attacking ships were vaporized in an instant. I recorded the whole thing. That's why you're weightless again. The gravity weapons were destroyed." "Where did those ships come from? Who has a fleet that large?" "They weren't ships, Vico. These things were too small to be ships. They were drones." "Drones? If Earth had drones, why did we launch manned fighters? Why risk pilots' lives if you didn't have to?" "Because these drones aren't from Earth," said Imala. "I just backtracked their flight path. They came from Luna." "Luna? And that's not the worst of it. All of our comm lines with Luna went dark right before the attack." It all became clear to Victor in an instant. Lem, that bastard sent a drone fleet to kill us. "But why?" said Imala. "He financed our attack, Vico. He gave us the shuttle, our gear." "Of course he did," said Victor. "This was his golden opportunity. We put our heads on the chopping block and placed an axe in his hands. Don't you see? We went to him for help, and he saw it as an opportunity to silence us. Think, Imala. Lem and Uko both want us gone. You're a whistleblower, I'm a witness to a crime Lem committed. What better way to make those two problems go away than to erase us? It doesn't make sense, Vico. You're suggesting Lem invested all this money into this operation just to bump us off? There are far less expensive ways to kill people. If he had wanted to silence us, he could have done that on Luna. Then why did we lose contact with Luna right before the attack? Said Victor. And no, Lem couldn't have dealt with us on Luna. There was too much attention on him. He was dogged by the paparazzi, and Uko wouldn't take that risk anyway. A scandal like that would topple the company. This is cleaner. No witnesses. No one knows we're even out here. No one would connect us with Lem. Ben Yahweh could, said Imala. She was helping us, Vico. I can't imagine she would be a part of this. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she thought Lem was legitimate. But then she and Dublin and the others at the warehouse who all saw us preparing for this would be loose ends. Are you suggesting Lem would silence them as well? I'm suggesting they're all corporates, Imala, and they'll do whatever is necessary to protect the corporation. I can't believe that, Vico. Ben Yahweh and Dublin are good people. They worked hard to help us. Who else would send drones from Luna, Imala? Who else has the capability to build a fleet like this? I'm not saying these aren't Juke-made, Vico. I'm saying we don't know the circumstances. Maybe Juke sold the drones to the Americans, or to China, or to NATO. Even if that's the case, Imala, Len could have told the buyer, oh, by the way, we have a strike team at the ship at the moment. Be a lamb and don't blast it to hell just yet, if you don't mind. Imala said nothing. They cut all communication, Imala. They cut us loose. If it wasn't Juke's, why didn't they send us a warning? The drones came from Luna. They would have seen them long before we did. Imala said nothing. They knew we were here, Imala. They knew I was inside. So they attacked the ship to destroy it and counted our corpses as a consolation prize. Then they become world heroes and all their problems go adios. The money Lem put into this is nothing to them, Imala. They were willing to pay twice that just to dump me out in the belt, remember? But Ben Yahweh is one of them, Victor interrupted. They may have kept her out of the loop, but you can be sure she's towing the line now. Imala was silent a moment. So what do we do now? When we're done here, we go back to Luna and jettison Lem Jukes into space without a helmet. That's what we do. What do you mean, when we're done here? We are done here, Vico. We lost the duffel bag. It's under a mountain of debris. And even if you could reach it, the bomb and equipment will have been crushed. You're lucky it didn't detonate already. We're through here. She was right. The whole plan had been in that duffel bag. Victor peeked over the lip at the wreckage. There was no sign of the bag anywhere, and Victor doubted he could separate any of the pieces that had been crushed together. Plus, if the bomb was damaged, it would be dangerous to try to recover it. Still, they couldn't leave empty-handed. I still have my helmet cam, Imala, and Earth still needs information about this ship. I'm going to the helm to gather what intel I can. If anything happens to me, you know what to do. He waited for her to object, but she said nothing. You're not going to argue? He said. Why waste my breath? Said Imala. You're more bull-headed than I am. You'll go regardless of what I think. He smiled. Turn off all communication equipment with Ben Yahweh in case they attempt to reconnect with us and confirm we're dead. Suit biometrics, ship monitoring, cut it all. We'll go totally black. Let them think we are dead. Then redirect all my helmet cam data somewhere else, a private cloud account maybe, somewhere Lem can't access it. Because if he has it, he'll bury it. The last thing he wants is the world knowing he tried to erase us. There are data satellites I can use, said Imala. I'll program a timer and a fail-safe into the account with instructions to forward everything to the nets if we don't log in every 24 hours. That way, if something happens to us, the data doesn't go undiscovered. Good, said Victor. He repositioned himself and zoomed his visor binocs to a space across the room where the inner wall had fallen and pipes lay exposed. I want to check those pipes out first. They must carry the plasma to the irises. He crawled to the edge of the shaft, made sure no one was looking, aimed his body, and launched. The kick with his left foot sent a stab of pain through him, but he tried to ignore it, soaring across the room, aiming for a spot on the wall to the left of where the pipes were exposed. He twisted his body at the last moment and landed expertly, his ankle blossoming with pain. He crawled toward the pipes using his hand magnets. When he was within a few meters, alarms on his suit went haywire, screaming in his ears. Weep, weep, weep! A message flashed on his HUD, warning radiation. The pipes, he said. They're radioactive. Get out of there, shouted Imala. Victor recoiled and launched again. He landed on the opposite wall, turned, and launched a third time, this time aiming for a shaft that led toward the center of the ship. He landed near the shaft entrance and crawled inside. "Are you all right?" asked Imala. "I think so," said Victor. "Do you feel lightheaded at all? Nauseated?" "I didn't get radiation poisoning, Imala. I wasn't exposed long enough. I should have known they'd be radioactive. They're funneling gamma plasma. The ship has a ram scoop drive. It collects hydrogen atoms as it flies through space and uses the subsequent gamma radiation both for fuel and as a weapon. Did you see the nozzles? Every few feet there are T-shaped nozzles on the back of the pipes that extend up to the hull and the irises. If we had a way to close off those nozzles, the plasma couldn't fire. We'd render the ship defenseless. There are tens of thousands of irises, Vico, thus tens of thousands of nozzles. You couldn't close them all even if you had an army of helpers. And you can't access most of them anyway. They're behind the inner wall and run the length of the ship. I didn't say it was possible, Imala. I'm making an observation. Victor froze. A half-dozen formics in heavy protective suits had just crawled out of a large shaft across the room, pushing 2 massive carts. The shaft was at least 4 times the width and height of the shaft Victor was in. 4 of the formics removed a large sheet of metal from one of the carts and carried it to where a portion of the inner wall had fallen away. They positioned the sheet over the exposed pipes, and the other 2 formics sealed the metal plate into place. "A repair crew," said Victor, "to cover the pipes. They must know when radiation leaks into the ship." "You'll need to find another way out," said Imala. "You can't get back to the original shaft this way without being seen." "First, the helm," said Victor. He turned away from the cargo bay and headed up into the shaft. It was dark and narrow and littered with dung and dust. Victor blinked out a command, and his suit began to create a map of his progress. He passed glow bugs and intersections and side passages. At times the shaft widened to accommodate another track, but Victor stayed true to his original course, heading toward what he hoped was the heart of the ship. He had expected to encounter more cart formics, but he saw none. His ankle had swollen despite the cool pack and increased pressure, and the pain had settled into a dull, throbbing ache. Soon the path began to clutter with discarded carts, all anchored to the track in a long, continuous row on the right side of the shaft, with no harnesses or formics attached. Victor maneuvered around them, squinting into the blackness ahead of him. He had decided it was too risky to use any artificial light, and had thus been relying on the glow bugs for any illumination. The bugs had thinned in number recently, however, and the way before him now was as black as space. He slid his hands along the wall, feeling his way forward. And then the shaft ended, opening up into a much wider but darker space. Far in the distance was a small circle of light, like the end of a long tunnel. Victor strained to see anything in the room, but he saw little definition in the blackness. He risked a beam of light from his glove and shined it on the walls just ahead. The room was like a circular cave, lined with honeycomb, with each cell as wide as Victor's shoulders and 1.5 meters deep. All of the cells near the entrance were empty save for grime and dirt and dung. Between the rows of cells were narrow ladders that extended the length of the room toward the distant light. "What is this place, Vico?" "Not sure," Victor said. "Food storage, maybe. A hatching site." "I say we turn back," said Imala. "I don't like surprises." "This whole ship is a surprise, Imala. I say we push on and get past this as quickly as we can." He maneuvered to one of the ladders and began to climb, listening for any sounds of movement ahead of him. The rungs were too narrow and close together to fit the toes of his bulky boots, but he was able to pull himself along with his hands. When the shaft was a distance behind him, he paused to catch his breath and turned to his immediate right, where a Formic's face was inches from his own. Imala cried out, and Victor recoiled, pushing off and kicking away from the ladder, shooting backward, all control lost. He crashed into the honeycomb on the opposite wall behind him, the waxy substance crushing inward on impact. His hand wrenched his gun free and brought it up, ready to fire on the attacking creature. Only no Formic came. He waited, finger on the trigger, heart pounding, but nothing lurched at him from the darkness. Finally he pointed his light and found the Formic across the room where he had left it, still tucked in its cell, unmoved. "Is it dead?" Imala asked. Victor looked to his right and left. Around him were other Formics, all in the same state of repose, their large black eyes staring outward. Victor reached out and scanned the nearest one with the sensors in his glove. "It has a heat signature, Imala," he whispered. "It's alive." He shined his light ahead of him and saw that between him and the light at the end of the chamber were dozens of Formics tucked into their cells. "This is a sleep chamber, Imala. Get out, Vico. Now." Calmly, slowly, wincing at every sound he made, Victor freed himself from the damaged honeycomb and made his way to the nearest ladder. Shards of honeycomb floated in the air around the crater he had made in the wall, and Victor saw that, by some miracle, he had landed in a cluster of empty cells surrounded by sleeping Formics. He turned back to the ladder, feeling sick. He looked ahead of him and behind him, judging the distance to the nearest exit. Instinct told him to flee back to the relative safety of the shaft. That was the quickest way out, and the one with the fewest Formics in his path. And yet he found himself putting one hand over the other, continuing his climb toward the unknown, moving quickly now. Imala remained silent, and for that he was grateful. He wanted to be able to hear any rustling or movement, however slight, around him. He passed Formics on all sides, their faces near his own, their vacant eyes staring outward. One of them could be awake and he wouldn't even know it, he realized. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the next rung in front of him, and the next, and the next. Minutes passed, and then he was clear, drifting up and out of the chamber, exhaling deep, his arms tingling with exertion. Bright light was ahead of him, and he floated forward, shielding his eyes. He caught himself on a mesh netting in front of him and blinked, letting his eyes adjust. The sight before him made him almost forget the room he had just left. Beyond the netting was a lush, dense garden, 4 times the size of the cargo bay and as wide as the middle of the ship. It was spherical in shape, and the inner wall was lined with thick jungle vegetation growing inward toward the center. The exception was a wide, circular section of wall on one side that glowed like a sun, bathing the garden in a hard, white light. It was like nothing Victor had ever seen. Trees with massive branches twisted and reached outward, their long, wispy leaves floating about them like a woman's head of hair. Oddly shaped flowers with petals as broad as Victor's arm span and stems as thick as his legs. Massive pillars of lichen stretched from floor to ceiling at various angles, like stalactites and stalagmites that had met in the middle, thick and solid and covered with mosses. Bushes and fern-like plants with leaves that fanned out in every direction, grasses tall and short, ivy that twisted around tree trunks and snaked up branches and then extended their reach beyond the treetops to wrap around the pillars or trees on the opposite side, creating a latticework of green and gold that moved slightly with the currents of air, as gentle as a spider's web. And creatures. The garden was crawling with insects and alien animal life. Large beetles scurried along the lichen pillars, feasting on the mosses. These were followed by crab-like creatures that bit at the lichen wherever the moss had been pulled away. On the ground, 2-legged animals that looked like the offspring of an ostrich and an iguana clung to roots and extended their necks, nipping at whatever fruit was nearest. As a boy, Victor had dreamed of such places. Many times on his family's mining ship in the Kuiper Belt, he had brought up images of the jungles of Earth, and imagined himself standing beneath their thick canopies, breathing in the crisp, pure oxygen, inhaling deep their damp green smells. Father had been a boy in Venezuela, and as a child Victor would ask him again and again to describe a rainstorm in the Amazon, or the sounds and smells of a world thick with life. "What is this, Vico?" Imala asked. "Their food supply?" "It's their life support, Imala. It's how they generate oxygen." There were holes in the garden floor in random places, each covered with mesh netting to allow oxygen to circulate throughout the ship without releasing the animals from the habitat. Victor watched a pair of lichen eaters chip away at one of the pillars. He was zooming in with his visor to get a better look when a formic scurried around the pillar, seized one of the lichen eaters, and snapped its neck. Then the formic stuffed the creature into a pouch strapped to its back and was off again, disappearing beneath the canopy. "Scavenger formics," said Victor. "They must feed off the lichen eaters." With his visor still zoomed in, he tried tracking the formic. Instead, the binocs found a cluster of formic corpses gathered at the base of a tree, their bodies mostly decomposed and crawling with insects. "They use their dead to fertilize the plants," said Victor. Nothing wasted. To Victor's right and left, outside the garden, a corridor curved around the spherical habitat. "I'm going around it, Imala. See if the helm's on the opposite side." He pushed off and moved to his right, launching from wall to move up the corridor. Once he reached the other side, he quickly concealed himself. A handful of scavenger formics were outside the garden sphere, removing dead lichen eaters from their pouches and pushing them down tubes into giant steaming vats. Pipes extended from the vats that led to a feeding station where a row of spigots were positioned. Dozens of formics were gathered at the spigots. They each came forward in turn, drank their fill from the spigot, then moved on. "This is how they feed?" asked Imala. "A liquefied slurry of melted crab creatures from a community spigot? How is this an advanced species?" "I need to find another way around, Imala. I can't go through here." He backtracked in the corridor until he found a groove in the floor. He followed it into a narrow shaft that bypassed the feeding station. That shaft connected with a much larger one, not unlike the giant shaft he had seen empty into the cargo bay. The shaft ended shortly thereafter at a room as wide as the ship and shaped like a giant wheel. The center or hub of the wheel had consoles and equipment all around it, presumably for operating the spokes of the wheel, which were massive transparent tubes, 60 or 70 meters high, that extended all the way up to the hull of the ship on all sides. Each tube was over 10 meters wide and had a troop carrier at its bottom, nose pointed upward, ready to launch. Hundreds of formics were climbing up into the bottom of the tubes and loading into the small ships, with wand sprayers in hand and gas packs on their backs. "What's happening?" asked Imala. "They're sending down reinforcements," said Victor. "They're launching more ships and troops. They're retaliating for the gravity attack." The last of the soldier formics climbed up into the tubes and sealed the door behind them. The formics manning the consoles outside the tubes spun giant wheels, and the irises at the end of the tubes opened, exposing the blackness of space beyond. Without warning or countdown, the launch mechanism shot the troop carriers upward like the contents of a giant pneumatic tube, slinging them out into space with such speed that Victor guessed the formics inside were feeling 5 or 6 Gs. The decking beneath Victor shook from the force, and then all was still again. The formics at the consoles closed the launch tubes, reset the launch mechanisms, and then exited the room, leaving it unoccupied. Victor waited a few minutes to ensure no one returned, and then launched down to the equipment, Imala cursing him the whole way for taking yet another risk. A needed risk, Imala. This is how they replenish their forces. If we can find a way to sabotage the tubes, then we can cut off their line of troops and supplies. We can weaken them by attrition. He caught himself on the consoles, eager to see the tech. But just like the formic pod he and Father had boarded in the Kuiper belt, the console here had no markings whatsoever. Look at this, Imala. Nothing is labeled. There's no language, no numbers, no symbols of any kind, no instructions whatsoever on how to operate this thing. Maybe they don't need symbols. Maybe they know the equipment perfectly. Everything has symbols, Imala. Humans would be lost without labels on our buttons. We'd be operating blind. How do they measure anything without numbers? Speed, intake, fuel, weight, navigation. How can they be precise about what they're doing? This is like a keyboard without letters. And look at the setup. It's entirely mechanical. No screens, no readouts. There have to be computer elements to this, but I can't see them. He flew to one of the tubes and examined the launch mechanism. It took him over an hour to determine how it operated. Imala kept pestering him about time, and his oxygen levels, and the need to get moving. Finally, he heeded her and moved on, taking another passageway behind the hub and launch tubes. He maneuvered through the tunnels for another half-hour, doubling back at a few places and taking different routes, before he finally found the helm, positioned as he had expected in the center of the ship. Victor hid himself inside the door and recorded everything with his helmet cam. The helm was a compact space, only big enough to accommodate 8 formic workers, all of them buckled to poles that extended from the floor or ceiling. They hovered before a series of screens, showing the blackness of space from various angles. Tiny objects on the screen were drifting, and the computer tracked each one with a dot of light. This must be their collision avoidance system, Imala. This is how they track any approaching ship. If they're tracking movement here, said Imala, they'd probably open the irises and fire the weapon from here as well. Victor watched the formics work, recording their every move. He had hoped to find a leader here, someone giving orders to the crew, or, even better, commanding the troops on Earth. A general a king, a ruler, anything. Victor no longer had the explosive device, but he still had his sidearm. If he killed the leader, the others in the helm would overwhelm him. But wasn't that a sacrifice he should be willing to make? Wasn't that his duty as a human being, to strike a heavy blow even if it cost him his life? A part of him had worried that once he reached the helm his courage would fail him, that he would freeze again like he had done the first time he saw Formic. But now that he was here, now that his hand was on his sidearm and the opportunity was before him, the doubt was replaced with a surprisingly steady calm. He was ready to die, he realized. They had killed Alejandra and Concepcion and Torone and Father. They had destroyed his ship, his only home, everything he had ever owned and cared about. Maybe Mother as well. Yes, he could kill. And gladly. But as he watched those on the helm, it quickly became apparent that no one was in charge. No one relayed any orders, no one shared any intel, no one sought instructions from a superior. Nor were there any written messages being shared, or gestures, or communication of any kind. It all became clear to Victor then. He removed his helmet cam and positioned it up in the corner near the ceiling, giving him a clear view of the console and main instrument panel. Then he backed out of the helm and hid himself in the shaft. Have you ever been inside the helm of a big ship, Imala? Especially when there's a threat nearby? No. It's chaos. People yelling across the room, passing intel, sharing computer readouts. It's loud, fast-paced, and highly collaborative. Everyone is making sure everyone else has all the information they need to do their job right. And yet, the Formics at the helm act like the others don't even exist, said Imala. None of them talk at all, said Victor. It's completely silent. We knew the soldier Formics on Earth were silent, but I had always assumed that was because they were so focused on the business of killing. But these Formics here, they should be in crisis mode. They were just attacked. They would be on high alert. And did you watch them? Did you notice how they did things simultaneously, even when they weren't looking at one another? It's almost as if they were speaking to each other, said Imala. Exactly. In fact, I think they are speaking to each other. Only they do it in a way we can't see. Mind to mind. You mean telepathy? I know it sounds absurd, Imala, but they respond instantly to stimuli that they can't possibly have known about unless someone told them. And yet no one tells them anything. He crawled out of his hiding place. I left my helmet cam in the helm. Keep recording everything. I'm coming back your way. We're returning to Luna. I've learned everything I can here. Hallelujah. Be careful. He made his way back, retracing his route, staying in the shadows and avoiding being seen. The wide shaft by the garden went directly to the cargo bay as he had hoped. The flotsam from the human ships had drifted back up into the center of the room. The repair crew was nowhere in sight. Victor made his way to the shaft he had first used and followed it back to where he had cut his way into the ship. He crawled outside, sealed the hole, removed the bubble, and flew back up to where the Formic cannon lay crushed against the side of the hull. There was a hole among the wreckage large enough for him to crawl through, and he wiggled out, free of the ship. He spotted the shuttle, aimed his body, and pushed off lightly, exerting just enough force to move at a slow drift. It took him over an hour to reach the shuttle at that pace. When he crawled back into the cockpit, he was so happy to see Imala that he extended his arms to embrace her. She made a face and held up a hand, stopping him. You've got Formic dung and glowbug juice all over your suit. Don't even think about touching me. Victor wiped a speck of gunk off his chest and wiggled the soiled finger in front of her. Imala was not amused. "Any closer and I will break that finger." He smiled, grabbed the wipes from their compartment, and began cleaning himself. "I'm alive, Imala. I didn't think I would be, but here I am, kicking and breathing. It's going to take more than your sour grumpiness to dampen this mood. We've made a video, Vico. That's it. We haven't ended the war. Focus too closely on the goal you haven't accomplished, and you'll fail to notice the victories you achieve along the way." "Who said that?" Imala asked. "Churchill? Sun Tzu?" "No," said Victor. "My father." Imala looked up from the console, smiling. "You're right. This is a victory, isn't it? A big one. Maybe someone will see this vid and know how to destroy the ship." A wide grin broke across Victor's face. "But Imala, my sweet, that someone is me. I know precisely how to destroy this ship." She stared at him. "Then why are we leaving?" "Because we can't do it alone. We need the right crew. When we have them, we'll come back and finish this." "We're coming back?" Victor pulled himself into his seat and began buckling up. "Never leave a job unfinished, Imala." She turned back to the flight controls. "More quotes from your father?" "No, that one is all me."
Chapter 7. Dozers. A pounding on the door woke Mazer with a start. He sat up in bed in the dark, remembering where he was. The hotel room, Leauge. A safe place. He checked the time on the wristpad Shenzhou had given him the night before. It was just past 3 in the morning. He threw back the sheet and swung out of bed, the images of his dream slowly fading like vapor. He had been with Kim at the salt marshes of Manukau Harbor. They had come to watch the godwits wade in the marshes and jab their long needle-like beaks into the mud, searching for food. There had been tens of thousands of the birds, all squawking and chirping and taking to flight like a swarm, moving as one. Only the godwits had changed. One moment they were fat, long-beaked birds. The next they were formics, miniature in size, scuttling through the water on all 6 appendages, scampering across the mud and then onto dry land, rushing toward Mazer and Kim like a wave, thousands of them, each growing larger with every step until the formics were actual size and then twice their size. And Kim had grabbed Mazer's arm and screamed. And an instant later her scream was a high-pitched clicking noise, and she wasn't Kim after all. She was a formic, with her maw wide open, ready to envelop him. 3 more knocks on the door, hard and insistent. Mazer found his pants, dressed, and made his way through the dark to the door. 2 Chinese soldiers with flashlights were standing in the hall. One was a Lai Bing, the other a Zhangji, or the Chinese equivalent of a private and a sergeant. "Please come with us," said the Zhangji in Chinese. "You and Captain O'Toole are wanted downstairs immediately." Mazer finished dressing and grabbed what little gear he had. They stopped at Witt's room on the way and roused him. "What's this about?" Witt asked. The Chinese soldiers didn't answer. "I don't think they speak English," said Mazer. He translated Witt's question into Chinese, and the soldiers responded. "Captain Shenzhou will explain," said the Zhangji. They reached the lobby and found Shenzhou conferring with a young officer in a biosuit. Shenzhou motioned them over and gestured to the man opposite. "Captain Rackham, Captain O'Toole, this is Lieutenant Hunyan. He'll be leading the convoy to Dragon's Den. We've had a slight change of plans." Hunyan held up his wristpad and projected a map in the air in front of them. "This is the route the convoy will take. Most of it is a straight shot west across the state highway here. We sent out dozer crews 2 days ago to clear the road, and they've been pushing aside abandoned cars and obstructions ever since. That is until 4 hours ago. We lost contact with them here." Hunyan tapped a spot on the route about 60 clicks out. "They were hit by a swarm of formic skimmers. We have satellite images of the aftermath." Hunyan brought up one of the infrared images. The devastation was obvious. 3 dozers lay in ruins. They were massive, bulky vehicles, not street dozers or landscapers, but the large industrial breed, with impenetrable cabs and wheels 3 meters high. Each dozer had a long V-shaped blade that jutted out from the front like a spearhead. The blades were almost twice as wide as the vehicle and nearly as long, giving the dozer a threatening aspect like a giant iron arrow. One of the dozers was burning, smoke billowing up from its cabin, obscuring the image somewhat. Another dozer lay on its side, the left half of it crunched inward. A third had a gaping hole in the center where a blast of plasma had seared straight through. "Any survivors?" asked Witt. "One of our drivers," said Hunyan. "This dozer here, the one turned on its side. The driver's stuck in the cab. We sent an armored vehicle to rescue him." "Judging by the look on your face and the fact that you pulled us out of bed," said Witt, "I'm guessing your armored vehicle never reached its destination." "Sadly, no," said Hunyan. He swiped through the holofield, and a new sat image appeared. It showed a different stretch of road, the features all outlined in varying shades of gray. An armored vehicle lay in 2 pieces on the asphalt, the edges jagged and twisted as if it had been ripped in half. A tire engulfed in flames was burning in the grass nearby. A Chinese soldier lay on his back in the middle of the road, a pool of blood beneath him. 2 shapes that appeared to be formics were standing beside the man's body, hovering over him. Witt reached into the holofield and spread his thumb and index finger apart, zooming in on the formics. The move didn't help. The image was still fuzzy. "What are the formics doing to him?" "They pulled him from the wreckage," said Hunyan. He made another gesture in the field, and a vid began. It was the driver's helmet feed from immediately after the crash. The video was dark and green, with lines of interference and static dancing across the screen. The man was on his side. His biometrics in the corner of the vid suggested serious injury. His blood pressure was dropping, his breathing was labored. Dark shapes appeared, pulling the metal of the cabin back. 2 formics, bug-eyed and calm, equipment in their hands. The soldier gave a weak protestation. His heart rate accelerated. He tried backing away, but there was nowhere to go. Hands reached in and lifted him out. The man cried out in pain. A small silhouette of the soldier's body in the upper right corner of the feed began flashing red over the leg. There was serious trauma to the man's femur. The image shook as the formics carried the man out and laid him on the asphalt. One of the formics reached in and removed the helmet. The world spun. The helmet was set on the ground, pointing away from the man now, back at the wreckage. "There's a full minute of silence here," said Hunyan. "We don't know what transpires. The driver's blood pressure continues to drop until he flatlines. We think he bled out. We don't know if the formics did anything to him." Hunyan reached in and switched off the vid. After that, the formics left. "What do you want us to do?" said Witt. "The driver of the overturned dozer at the site of the first attack is still stuck in his cab, alive," said Hunyan. "And we still have 5 kilometers of road to clear. I need you and Captain Rackham to free the driver. Then you'll provide cover while the driver clears the rest of the road. Otherwise, our convoy can't get through." "The dozers are all damaged," said Witt. "Unless you have another one, no one's clearing anything." Hunyan turned to Mazer. "I'm told you're a Herc pilot." "He's the best Herc pilot," said Witt. "What are you thinking? Flying a dozer out there?" "It's faster than driving one," said Hunyan. Then to Mazer. "Have you ever carried a load that heavy?" "Weight isn't an issue," said Mazer. "The grav lenses deflect gravity waves from Earth, sending them around the aircraft. All I need to do is adjust the lenses to perfectly balance with the landforms and maintain a constant distance." "What if the driver is too injured to finish the job?" said Witt. "Then I'll drive the dozer," said Shenzhou. "I'm coming with you. You just make sure a skimmer doesn't drop a plasma slug in my lap." "Dragon's Den is much closer to the damaged dozers than we are," said Mazer. "Why not send a rescue team from their end?" "They can't reach our man," said Hunyan. "They don't have dozers to get through the obstructions." "So much for a full night's sleep," said Mazer. "Where's the airfield?" Hunyan led them outside where a truck was waiting. Shenzhou, Witt, and Mazer climbed up into the bed, and Hunyan got behind the wheel. They drove west through the city. the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. The night air was cool and damp, and Mazer pulled his jacket tight around him. They saw no one and heard nothing. The buildings stood like giant hovering shadows, dark and vacant and eerily quiet. A stale, rotting smell permeated the streets. Uncollected trash, perhaps, or the stagnant water of the sewer lines, kept still because the power was out. On the outskirts of town, the buildings gave way to large industrial complexes with their oddly shaped pipes, towers, and silos. Next came the flat rice fields, which to Mazer's surprise were still alive, the tall grass swaying in the dark like the surface of the sea. Hunyan turned onto a service road, passed through an open security fence, and drove up onto the tarmac at a small airfield. A Herc sat parked outside a hangar, where a team of technicians with lights on their helmets were giving it a once-over. Beside the Herc was an armored spearhead dozer, its massive blade extending outward like a wedge. The satellite image hadn't done the spearhead justice. It was twice as large as Mazer thought it would be. Each wheel was taller than the truck. "You're sure that little aircraft can pick up that thing?" said Witt. "That's like an orange lifting a pineapple." "We'll be fine," said Mazer. "Science is on our side." Hunyan parked the truck inside the hangar beside 3 large crates. He hopped out, opened the crates, and began distributing the gear. "You'll wear these biosuits at all times. Each can carry 4 mini-tanks of O2. There's extra oxygen in the Herc. I'd advise you to keep at least 2 cans on your person at all times." He handed Witt an assault rifle. "It has built-in smart targeting. Pick your formic with your HUD, and the small munitions do the rest. If the target's within 1,000 meters, it's a near-guaranteed kill. Snap on the secondary barrel here for the grenade launcher." Witt snapped on the barrel and removed it, getting a feel for the mechanism. Mazer took a rifle and a box of grenade rounds, then unwrapped the biosuit and pulled it on over his clothing. "We'll be tracking your progress from here," said Hunyan. "Good luck." Shenzhou, Witt, and Mazer zipped up their biosuits, donned their helmets, and loaded into the Herc. Shenzhou sat in the co-pilot seat while Witt buckled into a jump seat back in the main cabin. "You give the word to go, Shenzhou," said Witt. "This is your op." "I'm just a liaison officer," said Shenzhou. "You're the experienced field commander. I say you're in charge." "Very well," said Witt. "Mazer, take us up." "Yes, sir." Mazer lifted off, maneuvered the Herc over the dozer, and turned on the talons, which unfolded from the side of the Herc, and descended to the dozer like giant spider legs. 4 of the talons gripped the dozer's side and lifted it off the ground to allow the last 2 talons to extend underneath and lock in place beneath it. Mazer ran a few tests to ensure the load was secure. Then he adjusted the lenses and slowly lifted off. They picked up the highway south of Leauge and flew straight up the center of the road, low and fast, the bottom of the dozer just a few meters off the ground. "Watch the skies," said Witt. "With a load like this, we're easy targets. We'll have very little maneuverability." "If something zeroes in on us," said Mazer, "we should set the dozer down, land fast, abandon the Herc, and make for cover." "Why not drop the dozer and fight?" asked Shenzhou. "Because dying doesn't accomplish anything," said Mazer. "This isn't a combat aircraft. It's a load carrier. It's not nimble. The formics can dance around us. I learned that the hard way. Plus, we're not armed for a fight. We've got a few rockets and a laser. That hardly makes us battle-ready. If we fight, we lose." "He's right," said Witt. "If the bugs close in, we bail or we fail." They flew in silence, Mazer watching the radar screen for formics. It felt strange to fly without Patu, Fatani, and Reinhardt beside him. They had been with him through thousands of flight hours, every takeoff, every maneuver. And now they were gone. Mazer had played the crash over and over again in his mind. The Herc had fallen in a dead drop from a low altitude. The chutes had failed, and the rotor blades hadn't deployed fast enough. All things considered, Mazer should have died also, and yet somehow here he was, saved by airbags and luck with nothing more than an ugly gut wound to show for it. It was the angle at which the Herc had landed that had saved him. Fatani was heavy and sitting on the opposite side and in the rear, and perhaps that was what had tipped the Herc just enough to have it land the way it did, with Mazer farther from the ground than the others at the moment of impact, giving his airbags a microsecond more time to deploy. He never saw what punctured his lower abdomen. A torn section from the front console, perhaps, or a flying piece of shrapnel. Whatever it was, he was lucky it hadn't torn him in half. Perhaps he had removed it immediately after the crash, yanking it out in some survival reflex. He couldn't remember. Everything was hazy at that point, a murky blur of noise and heat and pain. His teammates had made no sounds after the impact, and he hoped they hadn't felt the flames that had followed. That was something he could not forget. The raw heat of it, like the air itself, was on fire. He had lain in the dirt a short distance away, breathing smoke and the pungent fumes of melting plastic and seared human flesh as the aircraft popped and crackled and sizzled in the fire. He had been their leader. It had been his duty to protect them, and he had failed them, failed their families. "We're coming up on the armored vehicle," said Shenzhou. Mazer slowed their approach and hovered over the site when they reached it, shining his spotlights down on the wreck. The two halves of the vehicle lay on the asphalt, twisted apart like thin scraps of aluminum. The driver was still on his back in the center of the road where the Formix had left him. Witt moved up into the cockpit. "Can we get a close visual on the driver?" Mazer entered the command, and the image of the dead driver appeared in the holofield above the dash, the bright lights from the Herc giving the corpse a pale, ghostly appearance. The Formix had eviscerated him. A gash stretched across the full width of his stomach just above the navel, opening him like a sack. Much of his small intestines had slid out like a slick pink rope, hanging loosely at his side and atop his groin. Shenzhou turned away. "Zoom in on his stomach," said Witt. Mazer complied. It was a ghastly sight. The blood-stained uniform looked almost black in the harsh light. "He couldn't have sustained that injury in the wreck," said Mazer. "It's too straight of a cut. And he was alive for too long after the fact. With a wound like that, he would have bled out immediately." "Meaning what?" said Shenzhou. "Meaning he likely didn't die from the abdominal wound," said Witt. "The Formix eviscerated him after he was dead." Mazer zoomed in further, focusing on the abdominal skin flap. "Look at the incision. It appears cauterized." "A laser?" said Witt. "That would be my guess," said Mazer. "Wait," said Shenzhou. "You're saying the Formix waited until he was dead and then cut him open with a laser?" "They didn't just cut him open," said Witt. "They reached inside him and dislodged a lot of his small intestines." "Why?" said Shenzhou. Mazer shrugged. "Maybe it's their religion, a sort of death ritual. Maybe this is their way of honoring a fallen enemy." "Then why haven't we seen them do this before?" said Witt. "They've done nothing to suggest they honor us at all." "Maybe they've recognized we're a formidable enemy," said Mazer. "Maybe they underestimated us before, and now they see we won't welcome extinction so easily." "Or it could be the opposite," said Shenzhou. "Maybe this is how they desecrate the dead. A show of dishonor, contempt, like pissing on a grave." Witt inserted his wrist pad into the holofield and uploaded the images. "I'll send these back to General Sima and Strategos. Maybe they can make sense of it. Let's keep moving." Mazer took off again, and they made good time. They spotted a few Formic fighters high overhead, but the fighters maintained their altitude and made no move to approach them. 10 minutes later, a half-dozen skimmers popped up on the radar several clicks ahead of them, crossing their path and moving north. Mazer landed quickly near a cluster of trees and killed all power until the skimmers had moved on and were well out of range. Then he powered up again and pushed on. When they reached the 3 demolished dozers, the edge of the horizon was just beginning to brighten with the arrival of dawn. Mazer set the new dozer down on the highway and disengaged the talons. The overturned dozer lay on its side slightly off the road, its bulky mass traversing a drainage ditch. A huge dent in its side suggested that something had hit it, crushing the main cabin partially inward. Mazer landed the Herc beside the dozer, then exited the aircraft behind Witt and Shenzhou. The three of them climbed up into the overturned dozer and found the driver still alive in the cabin. Other than a gash on his head, he appeared unharmed. "The door's crushed," the driver said in Chinese. "I can't open it." It was true. The frame had twisted inward. If not for the bracing bars inside the cabin, the man would have been crushed as well. "We need to cut him out," said Witt. Mazer retrieved a laser cutter from the gearbox and sliced the door free. The driver crawled out and thanked them profusely. His hair and shirt were stained with blood. "What happened?" said Shenzhou. The driver answered in Chinese. "Troop transports. 3 of them. They dropped out of nowhere, gentle as a leaf, no sound at all. 4 MiGs poured out and climbed up onto my dozer, right up to the cabin. There were 6 of them directly in front of me, right there on the other side of the glass. I thought they were going to smash their way inside. But they just stood there, staring at me as if they were waiting for me to invite them in." "What did the other drivers do?" asked Shenzhou. "They had the same problem. 4 MiGs had crawled up to their cabins, too. We all had bugs on us." "This is before they attacked?" asked Shenzhou. "Before anything," said the driver. "No one had so much as shown a weapon. Then Corporal Zhizheng, one of the drivers, got spooked and began screaming, panicked. We told him over the radio to calm down and maybe they would go away. But he wouldn't listen. He drew his pistol and shot 2 of them through the glass. Then everything went bad. The 4 MiGs rushed back to their transports and opened fire. They killed Zhizheng first, incinerated him. I'm not even sure what they hit him with. One moment his dozer is there, the next moment there's so much fire I thought the whole world was burning." "What about the other dozer?" asked Shenzhou. "They hit it with something else, not fire. Something thick, like a jelly. It went straight through the cabin." "And you," said Shenzhou. "It looks like they rammed you." "One of the transports," said the driver. "It hit me so hard I thought my insides had snapped. I still don't know why. It would have been easier to shoot me with the jelly." "You were lucky," said Shenzhou. Witt asked Shenzhou to translate what the driver had said. When Shenzhou finished, Witt said, "Ask him if he can still drive a dozer." Shenzhou translated, and the man nodded. "The 4 MiGs aren't stopping me, sir." Mazer bandaged the man's head. Then the driver climbed up into the cabin of the new dozer and fired up the engines. As he pushed the wrecked dozers off the road, Shenzhou read a message off his wristpad. "The convoy has already left Leauge. They said we better have the road cleared by the time they reach us." "No pressure," said Mazer. The 3 of them hustled back to the Herc and got airborne. Witt took the co-pilot's seat and Shenzhou buckled up in a jump seat in the main cabin. They followed just behind the dozer as it continued down the highway, clearing the road of obstructions. They made slow progress for several kilometers without meeting any resistance. Mazer was beginning to think they might actually complete the mission when Lieutenant Hunyan's head appeared in the Herc's hollow field above the dash. "We have a situation," said Hunyan. "Over 60 troop transports just launched from the 4 MiG mothership. They've spread out over a distance of 300 kilometers and are descending through the atmosphere now. Beijing is tracking them, and we've calculated their projected trajectories. Several of them are heading toward our position. I'm sending you the data now." A series of images and maps appeared in the hollow field. Mazer studied them, saw where the reinforcements were entering the atmosphere, and turned to Witt. "We should get up there and gather what intel we can." "Agreed. Shenzhou, tell the dozer driver to stay the course and clear the road at all costs. Mazer, take us up." Mazer spun the Herc 180 degrees, then shot straight up into the air. Witt grabbed a handhold to steady himself, and Mazer felt his stomach drop. They ascended at a steady rate, scanning as they went, and stopped at 7,000 meters. At first the sensors detected nothing. Then the instruments started blipping, and dozens of dots of light popped up on radar. "We see them," Mazer said to Hunyan. "They're coming in hot. I count 4 transports dropping to the convoy's position." He read off the distances, speeds, and angles of approach. "Lieutenant," said Witt, "can you turn the convoy around and return to Leauge?" "Negative," said Hunyan. "We're 20 clicks outside the city. The path is barely wide enough for the vehicles to get through. There's no place to turn around." "Who is with you?" asked Witt. "The science team, a few dozen officers, and over 300 enlisted men." "What about firepower?" asked Witt. "We've got anti-aircraft missiles and 4 heavily armed VTOLs giving us air support. We've stopped and are forming a perimeter." Far in the distance, Mazer saw 4 white flashes of light high in the atmosphere. The lights descended, streaking downward at hypersonic speed, leaving puffy contrails behind them. There was another flash of light to Mazer's left, far to the south, heading in their direction. 9 o'clock, said Witt. "I see it," said Mazer. He swiveled the Herc to the left and angled it upward to allow the sensors to get a better read on the incoming ship. "Can we get a visual?" asked Witt. Mazer blinked the command in his HUD, and the transport appeared in the holofield in front of them. There wasn't much to see. A searing heat enveloped the transport, obscuring its nose from view. "Where is it headed?" asked Witt. "Already working on it," said Mazer. His hands flew inside the holofield, quickly gathering the data and slinging it into the correct receptacles for processing. The answer appeared on the map, and Mazer's heart sank. "Its trajectory puts it very near Dragon's Den." "How near is very near?" said Witt. "Near enough that Dragon's Den is clearly its target, or far enough away that it could be only a coincidence?" "Both," said Mazer. "It might be gunning for Dragon's Den, it might not. There are civilians down there, thousands of them, probably mostly women and children." "Any ideas?" asked Witt. "We get the transport out of the sky a little sooner than it expected." "You said this wasn't a combat aircraft," said Witt. "You said we weren't nimble enough." "All true," said Mazer. "So let's use it for what it was made for." Mazer's hand quickly moved through the holofield. He had the AI verify the transporter's trajectory and pinpoint its exact position at various points in time. Then he entered a series of commands, and the Herc shot forward, slamming him and Witt back against their seats. The altimeter numbers spun as the Herc climbed. "If there's a plan," said Witt, "now would be a good time to share." "We can't fire on the transport," said Mazer. "It's shielded. That's how they managed atmospheric entry." Witt gripped the handhold above his head, his knuckles white. "So we can't shoot it down?" "Great. That's not a plan." "We wouldn't want to shoot at it anyway," said Mazer. "Even if it didn't have the shield. Unless you're right on top of them, they can dodge whatever you throw at them. I say we take it down the same way we've taken out other transports. We fill it with grenades." "Every transport we've disabled was on the ground," said Witt. "We tricked them into landing, then we jumped from the bushes." "I fail to see any bushes here at 40,000 feet. I'll get above it and seize it with the talons. As soon as the Formics disengage the shield, you cut your way in and toss in the grenades." "What makes you certain they'll disengage their shields?" "They'll be threatened. They can't defend themselves with their shields engaged. You know how they are. They retaliate with blind ferocity, even if that puts them at greater risk. Once we clamp on, they'll do anything to lose us, including dropping their shields. And if they don't drop them immediately, they'll drop them when they land. Otherwise, they can't disembark from the aircraft. We'll destroy them then." "I liked it better when I didn't know your plan," said Witt. "Move back to the main cabin," said Mazer. "The drop door is in the center of the floor. I'll open it when the time is right. Strap yourself into the winch in the ceiling. There are boot anchors in the floor. Lock yourself in tight. Once I open the door, the transport hull will be directly below you. Cut your way in with the laser. Once you drop the grenades, we detach, get clear, and they become shrapnel in the sky. You want to grab an alien spacecraft moving at hypersonic speed? It's not moving at hypersonic speed anymore. It's slowed down drastically. It'll be even slower when we reach it." "How slow is slow?" "A few 100 kilometers an hour." "Naturally," said Witt. He began unstrapping his harness. "How much time do I have?" "Under 2 minutes. I suggest you pick up the pace." Witt wiggled out of the harness and got to his feet. "How are you going to get close enough to grab them without them shooting us down?" "We'll come at them from above. They won't be looking in that direction. Probably. Plus, these are transports. They're not made for deep space travel. They don't have collision avoidance systems. At least the ones we've destroyed in the past didn't, and this one looks no different. Also, they don't yet know we're a threat. Of course we're a threat. We're an armed aircraft. Formics ignore us until we pose a threat. Think about the Formics that stormed the dozers. They killed the crew after our man attacked. It's only when we confront them, when we resist, that they retaliate. Otherwise, we're not worth their notice. What about the armored vehicle that was ripped in half, the man eviscerated on the asphalt? Maybe he fired first. Maybe his gunner engaged them. And maybe you're full of it. Maybe, said Mazer. And maybe I'm right. Either way, you've got about 60 seconds until we intercept them. Are we doing this or not? Witt considered a moment, then nodded. How do I hook myself to the winch cable? There's a body harness in a compartment in the main cabin, directly behind me. Slip it on and tighten the straps around your thighs, chest, and shoulders. Then attach the carabiner on the chest of the harness to the matching carabiner on the pulley cable. There's a screw lock on each. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. I know how to tighten a screw lock, said Witt. He left the cockpit and moved back to the cabin. Mazer heard him rummaging through the compartment, grabbing the gear. They were high above the transport now. It had drastically decelerated. Mazer couldn't tell if the shield was still engaged or not. He called back to Witt. Are you harnessed in? I've got a harness on. Heaven knows if I strapped it on right. Does it feel like the worst wedgie of your life? Asked Mazer. The strap's so far up my crack it's part of my digestive system, said Witt. Then you're wearing it correctly. Pull some slack on the cable and buckle into one of the jump seats. Once we're in position, I'll open the door and you can get up. A moment later, Witt said, I'm buckled, and I'm already regretting this. Mazer started blinking out commands, getting ready for the drop. Hold on to something. Our forward thrusters will still be open, but once I disengage the grav lens, we'll lose altitude fast. The less time they have to react, the better. He put his hand in the hollow field where the virtual knob for the grav lens had appeared. Here we go. He cranked the knob hard to the right, and the Herc dropped like a stone. The straps on Mazer's lap and chest pulled taut as he was lifted off his seat, his stomach roiling with momentary weightlessness. He gripped the stick tight, breathing evenly, staying calm. The transport was 200 meters below them. 150. 100. Mazer didn't slow. His stomach was in his throat. He watched the transport with the external cameras, their feeds projected in the hollow field in front of him. The transport could react at any moment, he knew. It could spin, flip over, rocket forward to evade them. 50 meters. The transport didn't flinch. 40 meters. No movement. Brace for impact, said Mazer. At 10 meters, the transport jinked to the left to avoid a collision, but Mazer reacted instantly, adjusted their approach, and threw down the talons right before impact. The two aircraft collided violently, the bottom of the Herc slamming into the roof of the transport with a bone-rattling jolt. The Herc would have bounced off had the talons not seized the side of the transport and gripped it tight. Mazer was thrown hard against his harness as alarms went off in the cockpit. The transport dipped momentarily, then it righted itself and wiggled side to side, trying to shake loose its new cargo. Mazer shifted violently back and forth in his harness, the talons creaking and straining. Witt called up from the back. We can't do this if they treat this like a rodeo. Are their shields on? Mazer flipped through the exterior camera feeds and saw that the talons were a few inches away from the transport's hull. Affirmative. Shields are still up. We can't hold on forever, said Witt. Then we convince them to turn off their shields. Are you still strapped in? Yes, but what are you planning? I've had enough aerial maneuvers. Last one, said Mazer. He shut off the forward thrusters. At once he felt the increased drag and decreased velocity. Now they were dead weight. The transport was pulling them through the air, the Herc held in place by the biting grip of the talons, like a spider clinging to the back of a sparrow. Mazer reached into the hollow field and rotated the Herc's two jet engines, one 90 degrees to the right, the other 90 degrees to the left. Now both intakes pointed inward, perpendicular to their flight direction. We're going to roll. Hang on. Mazer tapped the throttle on the left engine, and the sideways thrust put the Herc and transport into a barrel roll, rotating them 180 degrees. Now the Herc was upside down, with the transport upside down and above them. Mazer equalized the thrust on the two engines so they exerted thrust in opposite directions and held the Herc in that position. Get ready, said Mazer. If I'm right, they'll deactivate their shields any moment now. "We're upside down," said Wit. "The plan's the same. I opened the hole in the floor, now the ceiling. You cut through and pop in grenades." "They'll deactivate their shields because they're upside down?" Wit shouted. "No. They'll deactivate because I'm taking away their gravity." Mazer rotated the direction of the grav lenses 180 degrees and switched it to full power. Whenever the Herc flew upright, everything above it had less gravity because it deflected the gravity waves from Earth. Now that they were inverted, he had to flip the lenses to achieve the same effect. It also meant the grav lens could once again keep them aloft. He imagined what was happening inside the transport, with the Formics suddenly experiencing less gravity. Were they strapped down? Were they standing in the cabin? Either way, he'd give them a shake and return the favor. He tapped the two throttles back and forth, rocking the transport from side to side. The Formics didn't disappoint. Suddenly the Herc flew backward and then caught itself at the rear of the transport, jolting Mazer violently. For a terrifying instant he thought they had been hit with something. Then he realized that the Formics had disengaged their shields, and the Herc's talons had clung to nothing for a fraction of a second until they had pinched inward and gripped the hull. "Shields are down," Mazer shouted. "Opening door." The door in the floor of the cabin opened, filling the Herc with the roar of the wind. Mazer watched in his helmet feed as Wit moved to the hole, reached upward with the laser, and cut into the transport's hull. It was going to work, Mazer thought. It was a ridiculous half-baked idea, but it was going to work. Then he saw the Formics. There were 3 of them. There in front of him, outside the windshield, clinging to the hull of their transport, flat on their stomachs, looking right at him. They wore gloves on the end of their appendages, shaped like flat discs that clung to the surface of their ship. Magnets, perhaps. They scurried forward, rushing toward him, and Mazer saw that his initial assessment was wrong. Only 4 of their appendages clung to the transport. The other pair held a weapon, short and cylindrical like a dirty metal jar. One of the Formics rose up and fired. A glob of thick mucus shot forth and splattered against the windshield in front of the co-pilot's seat, creating a circle of goo 1/2 meter in diameter. Inside the goo was a paper-thin, symmetrical, web-like membrane, like a delicately crocheted doily. The membrane flashed with white light, and the windshield exploded, showering Mazer with tiny shards of glass. Pain hit Mazer, hot and searing, and his HUD started flashing a warning. There were holes in his suit. The Formics rushed forward, surging for the cockpit. Mazer had his pistol up in his hands an instant later, firing. The head of the lead Formic snapped back, and its body went limp, still clinging to the hull. The other Formics were undeterred. They scurried forward with unnatural speed. Mazer shot one in the throat and the second in the arm. The latter kept coming, its arm half severed. Mazer put 3 more rounds in its chest as it tried to crawl into the cockpit, finally killing it. But that was only the first wave. 4 more were coming, all of them scurrying down the transport with an even greater sense of urgency. One of them fired. The doily glob struck the front of the Herc beneath the windshield. Mazer didn't see where it landed exactly, but the explosion followed an instant later, and then everything went wrong. Alarms, smoke, vibrations, spots of light twinkling in his vision. A garble of sounds swirled in his head. One moment they were 1,000 miles away. A half-second later they were deafening. He couldn't see, couldn't think, couldn't make sense of any of it. It was as if the world had been thrown inside a rattle and shaken vigorously. His vision cleared. He blinked, shook his head. His ears were ringing. Where was he? The Herc. Something was wrong with the Herc. Why was he upside down? The pistol. He needed the pistol. He looked at his hands and found them empty. Something hit him in the chest, knocking the wind out of him. It fell to the ceiling in front of him. A Formic, heavy and hairy, its limbs tangled and scrabbling for purchase, furious, desperate, flopping around in the tight space as it tried to right itself. Mazer couldn't breathe. His chest was empty, his diaphragm flat. All the blood had rushed to his head. He sucked in air, filling his lungs. The Formic got its footing and came at him, its maw biting at the hard plastic of his visor. 2 of its hands, still in their disc-shaped gloves, pounded him, hitting him like fist-sized balls of lead. His shoulders, helmet, chest, arms. Mazer grabbed the creature's forelimbs to try to wrestle it away, but the Formic, despite its size, was as strong as he was. He almost didn't notice the weapon in its secondary hands, compact and gleaming, aimed at his center mass. Mazer only had time to swat it to the side. The barrel swung wide, and when it discharged, the glob fired out the windshield, hit the transport near its nose, and exploded outward. Mazer was thrown against his seat. The Formic slammed into him again. Everything started to spin. Outside the windshield, the world flashed past like an amusement ride. Earth, sky, earth, sky. He had no sense of direction, no idea what was up and down anymore. He heard a voice, calm and clear, a woman's, speaking in Chinese, pleasant but insistent. What was it? Who was she? It was the Herc's AI, he realized, calmly reading off a litany of system failures. Mazer pushed the Formic's limp body off him. A shard of shrapnel protruded from its back. He steadied himself against the wall. His equilibrium was shot. He was going to be sick. "Get ready!" shouted Wit. For a moment the words meant nothing to him. Get ready? Then it came to him. Wit, the hole, the grenades, his asinine half-baked plan. They were still connected to the transport, both ships spinning and plummeting